Hello and greetings, everyone. Welcome to Thread to Threshold. I am your host, Phil Rice. Today, on this Friday, 21st of August, during one of the most interesting times in my life, I have the very awesome Steve Seven, direct from Germany. And today's topic is, we will be discussing the psychopathology of a conspiracy theorist. And before today's topic is... sorry about that. And before we get started, I just wanted to set the mood a little bit to get us in the zone for some good wisdom and learning here. So for those of you that are open to it, I'm going to give us a small, very quick, easy breath meditation. For those of you who are interested, bring your hands together like this. Bring the two halves of your body together, with your tips just underneath your nose, with your arms away from your body a bit, just like a tennis ball in between your arms and your body. And I want you to close your eyes and I want you to take 3 deep breaths with me. In the nose, out the nose. Breathing in. Feeling that air fill up your belly, expanding your chest cavity, holding it, and release. Just feeling yourself sink down. Breathing in. Breathing in there. Good ass air. And it's good to be alive, right? Hold it and release. Just come back. Last one, breathing in. Hold it. Hold it. Let it move all throughout, to the ends of your fingers, to the ends of your toes, all throughout your body, and release. Open your eyes up. It's good to be alive, right? I know there's lots of crazy, weird stuff going on right now, but we can still be bastions for common sense, for logic, and these types of things. So without further ado, I'd like to bring Steve on. Oh, just one more thing. If you really enjoy the show, guys, I make a point of announcing this now. If you really like this show and would like to support it, I have a support mechanism. You can send me an email, threadtothreshold@gmail.com, and say, yay, go Phil, I love what you're doing. This is awesome. Keep going. Or if you'd like to make a monetary donation, that would be ace as well. Anything and all is much greatly appreciated. And you can see at the bottom of the screen here, I've got a banner here that I'll flash a couple of times during the show, threadtothreshold@gmail.com. It's a PayPal destination, and there'll be some other details in the show details. But anyway, without further ado, I'd like to bring on the very cool, the very awesome, the very knowledgeable, the very beardy, Steve Seven, all the way from Germany. G'day, Steve. How are you, brother?
Hello, Phil. Thanks for having me on your show.
You're very, very welcome.
Okay, so yeah, tonight's topic is the psychopathology of a conspiracy theorist. And I guess, I think that I am reasonably qualified to discuss this. On the one hand, being a psychologist with quite a bit of experience in psychology, and on the other hand, being not just a conspiracy theorist, but in fact, for at least 35 years, if not longer, I've been a conspiracy lifestyler. In other words, I love
that, conspiracy lifestyler. I'd love for you to extract on that. That's a new term for a lot of people.
Okay, well, I mean, basically, despite the fact that I have compromised, well, not compromised, but adapted, if you like, to the dominant culture. I've run businesses, built houses. I'm at the moment, I have a publishing house. But I have always had an off-the-scale alternative set of values. I suppose it would be fair to say I'm anti-materialistic. I certainly don't buy into the ideals and values of the dominant culture. And probably also one of the important aspects is that not only do I not buy into this dominant culture, but I don't see that it will last long. Kingdoms rise and kingdoms fall, and I don't think that the Western modern industrial social experiment is going to, be the only culture in the history of the human race that's not going to collapse. And I think I'm not the only one that sees that. So, well, back to our subject, which is the psychopathology of a conspiracy theorist, then I'll be unpacking this throughout the hour. So I will deal later with my own individual psychopathology that created me personally to be a conspiracy theorist. And in fact, as we go through, sort of little bits will be added, but I'll talk more broadly about conspiracy theorists. The term conspiracy theory actually is quite a basic, simple term. It's used derogatorily now. It's used as an insult almost. And all it means is someone who is investigating a crime with more than one criminal. That's the conspiracy aspect of it. And it was first popularized and used as it is being used at the moment, to denigrate someone that is looking outside the mainstream explanation for certain events. It was actually popularized with the JFK assassination because the powers that be at the time didn't want to go through the process of a conspiracy investigation, which would have meant a federal case as opposed to just a normal criminal case. And so they were adamant, absolutely adamant, that Lee Harvey Oswald was going to be proven to be the only shooter. That's why the whole idea of Oswald acting alone was very important for the people who were in charge of the whole operation of finding out what happened. And they didn't want the idea that there was a conspiracy. And part of that was there was a lot of, I won't go into too many details, but there was a lot of confusion in the amount of bullets that were fired, the time between the bullets that were fired, and also the injuries that were inflicted not only on Kennedy himself, who received two non-fatal injuries apart from the fatal injury, and one of his security officers received 5 non-fatal injuries, and the 2 non-fatal injuries to JFK and the 5 non-fatal injuries to the security officer were had to make Oswald the only shooter. There had to be a single bullet that Oswald had fired, which was called by the Warren Commission the single bullet theory, and by the people that didn't accept that, it was called the magic bullet. And I must admit, I've actually loosened up a little bit in my conspiracy. I watched the Oliver Stone movie on the JFK case maybe 15 or 20 years ago, and after watching that, I thought the magic bullet was impossible. But recently I revisited the case, and in fact it is possible if the security officer and Kennedy was sitting in exactly the perfect position for the bullet to go through Kennedy's back, out his neck, along the trouser leg of the security officer, and things like this. It could actually have happened. Whether it is likely to have happened, more likely to have happened than 2 shots, is open to question. The thing that really annoys me or sets me into the conspiracy is that the Warren Commission began their investigation with the conclusion that there was a single shooter, and they obviously marshaled the evidence to suit that conclusion. And as soon as, this is one of the things that us conspiracy theorists, that's a red flag for us. That's like, okay, something's going on here. They're going to make up some crazy idea of this, that, they wouldn't almost certainly not be able to, formulate a repeatable experiment to show that this is actually, everyday occurrence. This is what happened. 1 bullet created 7 wounds. But anyway, I don't want to go too far on this tangent of JFK. I think that after Jack Ruby shot Oswald within hours of him being arrested, I think that really showed more than anything that there was some form of conspiracy, and people were afraid that Oswald was going to sing about who else was involved. But as far as the mainstream line goes with the JFK case, Oswald was a single shooter who worked completely on his own. I think that the idea or the excuse that they've come up with about Jack Ruby assassinating Oswald was that a private person wanted his own revenge for Oswald shooting his favorite president and paid Ruby's family. I mean, Ruby obviously committed suicide. There's no way that Ruby went to shoot Oswald and expect to get away with that. Ruby went in there obviously with the understanding that his family was going to get a massive payout, and effectively Ruby committed suicide because he was dead within seconds of shooting Oswald, and he would have known that. But anyway, so nowadays, when people are describing conspiracy theorists, there's sort of two basic lines that they will use if they don't have a lot of experience with conspiracy theorists and sort of, aren't particularly interested in getting to know why we are looking outside the mainstream for our answers to certain things. They will just think that we're irrational, illogical, aren't dealing with the evidence, and are on some sort of, daydream, delusional daydream. Usually these are the younger people who think that we're wearing tin hats and tinfoil hats, or aluminium foil hats, and believe in alien reptiles are actually in the White House or whatever. But the more sophisticated answer, because people who really want to, like sociologists or other social scientists who really want to understand or try and explain why there are conspiracy theorists, they understand that we're not irrational people. And I'm certainly not an irrational person. I have come to Germany to learn German because of my studies in psychology. A lot of the psychology that I've studied was first written in German. It's been badly translated into English. So I came here to learn German so that I could more rationally engage with some of the early psychologists and philosophers who are very much part of my own research. So I mean, I certainly can't be accused of not being a rational person. And of course, so what happens is that the second answer is that it's preferable to believe that someone, anyone, even a malevolent power is in control than to deal with the fact that things are random. And this has become the main sort of excuse or the main reason that people are putting forward in the mainstream about why conspiracy theorists exist. So in other words, I have an existential problem with the fact that the universe is random, and so therefore I have to invent a whole series of sort of theory around explaining that no, actually this has been planned and executed by people in the conspiracy. And I wanted to spend a little bit of time because on this particular point about that I am suffering from, or us conspiracy theorists are suffering from an existential angst because we don't want to live up to the idea, or we don't want to face up to the idea that the universe is random, and so we've got to put some sort of order in there, and we hear this a lot. In fact, even in Germany, recently I read a headline that said exactly that. And my first question is, where is this random universe that these people are talking about? Because in fact, I will freely say right now that I'm not so sure that this random universe actually exists. I mean, if you have an apple seed and you put it in the ground, and if the ground's okay and you get enough rain and you get enough sun, you're not going to get a pear tree. You're not going to get a strawberry plant, and you most certainly aren't going to get an elephant come from the apple seed. You're going to get an apple tree. And you can do this over and over and over, and you can plant an apple tree, and there's no randomness, an apple seed, and there's no randomness about what will come up. The reason that I want to spend some time here is that this is something that you often hear with the atheist movement when they talk about the design argument, if you like, and they're absolutely adamant that there's no design in the universe. And yet they are constantly talking about the laws of nature.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Which is another way to say the design of the universe, isn't it? You know.
Yeah.
In fact, my children are very big on dinosaurs at the moment, and we often sit down and look at dinosaur documentaries. And in fact, there's a bit of a revolution in dinosaur paleontology at the moment. I've got a little prop here today. This is a triceratops. Okay, can you see that? All right, okay. This is a triceratops, okay, and it has this. Sorry, I'm a bit unco here. I'll do it like that, yeah. Okay, it's got this flange here, this bone flange, okay. Now, up until recently, all that looked at the triceratops with its bone flange assumed that that was a shield, or some sort of weapon that it used in fighting, and of course the horns sort of, it's got horns as well, and the horns were also seen as that, right? Now, recently, paleontologists said, oh, no, that's too heavy. That would weigh the triceratops down, and it would be so cumbersome it couldn't possibly be used for fighting. And so now what they think, okay, is that it's like a peacock's feathers. And in fact, this is quite a few paleontologists are saying that dinosaurs were thanks, Brock. Dinosaurs were brightly coloured, and this was a sexual attraction device. And it also had, I can't remember the exact detail, but something like the dinosaur is saying, look how much extra genetic material I've got that I can, I've got surplus and I can grow this huge big flange on my head, this bone flange, I actually personally believe the original, Marshall explanation that it was something to do with fighting. I think it's a bit of fantasy that they're talking about. I mean, they're even talking about some of these horns were used to tickle their partner to get them sort of sexually prepared and things like that. They weren't for fighting at all. They were actually, foreplay devices.
Is that where the word horny comes from?
Yeah, but this is the point, okay? This is the point. These same, like Richard Dawkins and these atheists who are absolutely adamant there's no design in nature, it's all completely random and all of this, right? These same evolutionary biologists or paleontologists will never accept anything is by chance. There must be a reason that this dinosaur has this flange, right? And if it cannot be explained, they will find an answer or whatever, the horns here or the color of it, or you know what I'm saying? In other words, where's this random universe that these people are talking about, right? Okay? And the reason that I am going to actually, instead of, I suppose this is all part of, the psychopathology of a conspiracy theorist, because in fact, I actually think that this idea that there is a random universe that is being pushed so much, you said, neuro-existentialism, that we're in this deep malaise because the entire universe has no meaning and it's completely random, which of course is born out of 20th century existentialism, Jean-Paul Sartre and people like that. Who after the war couldn't understand, how it was possible that the universe could be doing what it was doing to them, okay, and had to come up with some sort of philosophical argument to sort of, make themselves feel correct, if you like, have a correct perspective. Okay, but in fact, it's also underpinned by Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, which is, I will briefly explain, is that when these quantum physicists are doing experiments with particle accelerators, okay, I'll just do this very briefly, and they're getting mesons and photons and accelerating them and where they collide. Okay, this is Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. It's actually quite an important thing to understand. Where they are colliding, there's a 60% chance that the mesons and photons in the subatomic particles will create the same piece of matter that's making our table or our computer or the light or the wall or whatever. There's a 60% chance that they will do that. There's a 30% chance that they will actually create something else. And of the 10% chance left, there's sort of this infinite number of other possibilities that these mesons and photons could make, potentially make, theoretically make, okay? But the thing is, this is the miracle, all right? This is the design, if you like, is that this table keeps being this table moment after moment. The subatomic particles, as they're colliding, right, in sort of, you know, free fall, right, are continually making the same table, despite the fact that, according to Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, it's just a random selection that they're doing. You see what I mean? So theoretically, okay, the universe is chaos, but in actual reality, this table, I mean, you know what I mean? I mean, how often do tables disappear? How often do we plant an apple seed and get an elephant? Now, theoretically, we could do that. According to quantum physics, we could plant an apple seed and get an elephant. All right. According to quantum physics, there's a tree growing in the middle of this room, right? Theoretically. Okay. But the thing is that, when does this ever happen? I've never seen it, and I've never seen any record of anything like this happen that I could believe, you know. I mean, obviously, you know, there are some stories that we hear that are trying to push some of these things, and I also am not averse to, as we discussed in our last interview, Phil, you know, there are things that were used to be called miracles, like magnetic healing and things like this, that now we understand through quantum physics, which brings me to the next point, of course, that things like the interconnected nature of the universe has come from, you know, our understanding of this has come through quantum physics, okay? But that's something that we can experience with the oceanic feeling, with meditative states. And it's also something that makes sense by things like gravity. Again, in the last interview that we had, I talked about Newton, who had been disparaged for the separate building blocks universe that Descartes and the other modernists have been pushing forward for so long, okay? What Newton is guilty of, okay, and the theory of gravity is part of that, is the mechanical universe. And he is often disparaged, right, for being one of the main scientists or the main voices who have shown us that the universe is mechanical. In other words, it's not random, it's mechanical, okay? Before Newton, God made tides come in and out. After Newton, we understood that that was the gravitational pull of the moon, right? So it was a mechanical thing. In other words, this is the God of the gaps. As we understand the mechanics of nature more,
God of the gaps, that's an interesting concept.
Okay, all right. And Newton did that. But, you know, Newton, you see what I mean? It's like in another video I made, I talked about Einstein, who said time was an illusion, albeit a persistent one. Again, in meditative states, we can experience that. In divination, right, we're working with that understanding, okay? And in dreams, we will often experience prophetic insights. It's one of the most common things that I've heard from so many people. I've experienced it myself, of having prophetic insight, flashes of the future of your own life in your dreams. It's very common. Even Jung wrote about that, okay? That often his patients, before they came to see him, before their first visit, they would have a dream, a significant dream, okay? So the idea that of time being an illusion, which comes also out of quantum physics, is something that we can have some sort of tangible experience of. The idea that the universe is interconnected is something that is basically visible to us anyway. We can get sunburned from the sun that's 8 light minutes away, right? Do you understand? It's connecting with us across all of that space, right? And of course, the gravity from the moon changing the tides. So the interconnected, the invisible interconnected synchronicity and all of these things, that's something that's tangible. But the idea that the universe is random, the idea that there is no order in the universe, is a myth in the colloquial sense of the term myth. In other words, it's just a fallacy, There's absolutely, and as I have explained, people like Richard Dawkins are absolutely adamant that there is no design in the universe and are constantly talking about the laws of nature. In fact, I remember one interview in about 2012, I was very keen on the atheist movement, which was quite big then. I don't think it's so big anymore. And I watched a lot of clips of people like Sam Harris and Richard Dawkins. But they kept not making sense. They kept contradicting themselves all the time. Like Dawkins was always disparaging this idea that there was a design to the universe. In fact, he wrote a book called The Blind Watchmaker. And yet I remember he was interviewed, and the interviewer actually asked him, is there anything that doesn't make sense? Is there anything that sort of, isn't kind of for a reason? And I suppose he's made it public himself. It's a public video, so I'll give you his answer. And it was, I just can't understand why we have to have sex to procreate. That was it. That was the only thing that he could come up with that didn't make sense, that wasn't part of a totally ordered universe. And I mean, again, these people, these atheist biologists and that, they'll say, well, there's a particular muscle, right, that has a shell and the lid doesn't close perfectly. So where's your God? Because there's not a perfectly closing lid on this one muscle, or even our eye, I think, is not quite perfect. So because God is such a bad engineer, or I mean, that's not a good term, but the creator or the intelligence behind, even intelligent design is a term I don't like either, it having been hijacked by fundamentalist Christians and given, some pretty crazy kind of connotations. But the point is that, really searching long and hard to try and find some mistakes in the universe, and all that is doing is showing that, well, the universe is still in a process of evolution.
That's a good point.
Yeah, so I mean, yeah, sure, okay, that mollusk that they're talking about, or that mussel that hasn't got a perfectly closing shell, give it 1 million years. And it's not finished. The paint's not dry yet, I mean, you know what I mean? It's the same with humans. I mean, goodness me, I'm sure there have been many times when I thought, God, what did you do? Why did you make humans? And then I just sort of reconcile myself with the idea, because, of course, I don't believe in the random universe, which is why I'm a conspiracy theorist, And I'm going to get in a minute to the other point of humans, because, of course, everyone will be going, all the people that sort of, have a problem with conspiracy theorists will be saying, yeah, we know that the universe is totally in order, if you like, the mechanical universe, but humans are random. And in fact, these same people, these same anthropologists and sociologists and social scientists that are saying this, coming out with this idea, that conspiracy theorists are afraid of a random universe, and we've got to come out with some sort of theory to make order out of chaos. They're spending all day, these people are spending all day making stereotypes and looking at formulaic propositions for why people are like that. For example, Hitler, they've done a profile on Hitler. He had a doting mother, a domineering father, do you see what I mean? And his particular situation in time and space where he was created him to be like that. And, I remember when I was a contractor working on a building site, I was doing the painting and I was talking to the builder. And he said to me, what do you think about gangs? Because in New Zealand at the time we had a big problem with ethnic gangs. And I said, well, you get unemployment, you get rich next to poor people, and it's a mathematical formula. It's like adding 1 + 1 = 2, And he said, yep, that's how I see it, It's like people are products of their environment. And I mean, we know now that, a fact that has been assumed all the way through the social sciences is that in neurology now we know that the material structure of the brain is actually formed by our early socialization. So the idea of being brainwashed, I mean, is no exaggeration. We know absolutely that, and I mean, this is what sociologists are doing all the time. They're doing this all day, every day. And in fact, they actually take it to a much greater extreme than I would ever go. as a psychologist, as a humanistic psychologist, if you like. You know, this again, this existentialist idea of you know, that we've got a malaise because we're living in this so-called random universe, this meaningless random universe, right? We have no inherent idea of a self, which is again what we talked about in the last interview. You know, this idea is still holding on there. That you know, in neuro existentialism, you know, that we have no inherent idea of self, you know, which is false. It's objectively, it's a false premise. You know, it's been demonstrated conclusively in developmental psychology that because the baby has the inbuilt instinctual ability to not only make relationships with its caregivers, but also to structure them in a hierarchy, okay, that implies that the baby has a sense of self right from the moment it's born, you know. But that idea is counter to the trajectory that the education system is pushing us into. You know, they're pushing us into this idea that it's a random, chaotic universe, which is absolutely false. They're pushing us into the idea of the separate building blocks, universe, despite the fact that you know, quantum physics and basic common sense is telling us that everything is interconnected. And they're pushing us into this idea of the random, you know, meaningless universe. You know what I mean? And this is in
This is
fact part of.
intentional?
Yeah, I was just about to say this is actually part of the conspiracy. You know. So anyway, I've spent a lot longer discussing this foundation than I anticipated. But the reason that I did that was because I am sure that there are people here who are. What's the word, sympathetic to conspiracy theories. And so I just thought I'd fill in maybe what might be a few blanks for people about the way that the world is operating, you know, because in fact there's a lot of false information and a lot of false understandings that are just taken for granted, you know. I mean, you know, the idea that I'm a conspiracy theorist because, you know, I have an existential malaise at the thought that nothing is in control. When, I mean, you know, are you kidding me? Are you trying to kid me? I mean, as far as, okay, I'll get more into the subject now. I just want to give you some small examples. I mean, the JFK thing is, I was born in 1963, so I really, you know, not that necessarily, because I'm actually going to give you some old examples anyway, but I you know, I suppose I'm better versed in the examples within my field of psychology. And you know, one example, as I said, I came to Germany to learn German because of mistranslations. Well, it's not very well known, but those people who have spent the time and effort to do the research are very, you know, versed in the fact that Freud was deliberately mistranslated into English. Okay, now this isn't necessarily a big conspiracy theory. It doesn't take a lot of people to have done that. You know, it takes basically the publisher, the translator, who James Strachey was the guiltiest of the translators of Freud, and Freud himself, who knew it and who didn't care because he didn't like Americans. Okay. Now, there's not been a lot of noise about this. Bruno Bettelheim wrote the book on the subject, Freud and Man's Soul. There are, as far as I'm aware, 2 academic journals that take it a little bit further, and that's it. Okay, so it's, you know, Bruno Bettelheim's book suggests that the reason that this happened, okay, was because psychotherapy is expensive, and one-to-one counseling doesn't sell drugs. And so he put the whole idea onto the idea that, you know, the reason, if you like, of Freud being mistranslated into English was because it didn't suit the pharma firms. Right? Okay. And there are other, you know, I mean, for example, in right at the beginning of psychology, Pavlov with the salivating dogs came out publicly and said that the regime in Russia at the time was constantly throwing money at him and wanted to effectively hijack his research. Now, that's not controversial because he came out, he obviously didn't accept, well, he was very well funded, but he didn't cooperate with the regime and, in fact, told everyone, look, these people want to, be able to, tap into what I'm doing here to be able to control you. And there are other far more controversial examples that I won't go into because very well respected psychologists and whole schools of psychology are implicated in helping dictators throughout the 20th century doing what they're doing. Now, am I a conspiracy theorist to accept these things? To take these things on board and put them in a big jigsaw puzzle, put them all together. This is the overthinking that I'll be accused of by people that don't want to buy into conspiracy theories. They're thinking I'm overthinking these things. I'm over-rationalizing these things, which is, in fact, when people are trying to criticize me, I don't know, apart from, young people who sort of haven't really discussed anything, just sort of seen one post that I might make on social media or something like that, who might say that I'm irrational. But generally, people that are trying to actually engage with me and understand where I'm coming from, they'll end up saying that I'm far too rational. I'm overthinking these subjects. But I think that, in fact, there is a kind of a bigger picture.
Yeah, and I just want to also say that a superficial or cursory internet search, looking at the top sort of 10 results from Google and using that as your knowledge base. I mean, we're aware of terms like astroturfing, which Cheryl Atkinson, a former employee of CBS News, who came out when she found the CDC were fiddling the figures for, I think it was the swine flu or the H1N1, and that's a documented official thing that you can go look up. Cheryl Atkinson, she talks on a TED talk about astroturfing, which is basically, you rig the search engines in a sense, or you rig the information that's available to come up, and so it sort of confirms a bias or it leans itself towards more one understanding. But the whole idea of astroturfing is that there's enough of a layer there that people will not go that deep, and people are assumed that their level of scholarship on a topic is just going to be some flimsy, internet search of the top 10 or 20. But I tell you what, you know how this rolls, brother. You know how deep that rabbit hole goes. I mean, people talk about overthinking. People aren't thinking enough about the right things, and what they do immerse their head in, isn't necessarily the right bucket. When it comes to these topics, because there's layers of information, there's layers of context. This information is there to be discovered, but if you need sound bites, that really only pays tribute to the growing sort of attention deficit that most people in the modern day are experiencing, because they want everything served up to them on an easily palatable, digestible plate that conforms with what the other people in the community are talking about and things of this nature. And so there's almost like a laziness of informing yourself has almost become like a weaponized sort of commodity alongside ignorance, because people don't want to know about it, and when they get presented with information that might conflict with their current worldviews and things, they don't want to go look at it because it's too much. And you talk about before about the random world theory, the random reality theory, and it's like going, well, that to me sounds like an orchestrated attempt at poisoning the worldview of people. So there is no meaning, and so we can only derive morality based on maybe what men can come up with. But I know that's getting a bit off the topic. But I just wanted to add that. And I also wanted to say to the crowd, all the people out in the audience, thank you so much for listening and watching, everybody. And please, I've just put the little thing up here. If you've got any questions for myself or Steve, throw them into the chat, and we'll get to them at some point during the show. But anyway, I don't want to take up too much time here, because Steve's always got juicy stuff to drop. So just
okay, thanks. Yeah. Okay. I did spend a lot longer on that intro than what I thought I would, but that's fine. We can just carry on now. Okay, so obviously the psychopathology of a conspiracy theorist, the first thing is that we don't trust the government. Okay. It's sort of like, I remember when Pink Floyd put out the Wall album, and I mean, apart from other reasons, I wasn't a big fan of that, although I was always a big fan of Pink Floyd, their early stuff. That kind of was probably when I stopped liking them as a great band, because it was so predictable. The whole album was so predictable. And I mean, the whole idea, mother, should I trust the government? You know what I mean? I mean, who trusts the government? I mean, you don't have to be a conspiracy theorist, to know that the government doesn't give a toss about you, I mean, I come from New Zealand where they put fluoride in the water. And I mean, people have, scientists have got up and protested for years, decades, about this poison, this industrial waste that has been put in the water, right? And they just carry on doing it. You know what I mean? And I could give you heaps of examples. The Australian Navy subjected some of their own personnel to a close-range nuclear blast as literally laboratory rats to monitor the long-term effects of it. And I mean, you see, this is the thing, the idea that the government's going to go out there and blow up, your enemy, that's one thing. But the idea that the government is going to literally torture its own people, and not only its own people, but people that have put their lives on the line to go and fight for that country, in the Navy, right? And they're just going to treat them like trash, And I mean, these are just two examples. I was just giving you two off-the-cuff examples. I mean, when I studied criminology, I did a couple of papers in criminology in 1992, and there's just a huge, big, long list of these sorts of things. The next thing is that, well, do we trust corporations? And of course, no, we don't trust corporations. Again, in criminology, a huge, big, long list of corporate crime that's committed by, drug companies are the worst, A.H. Robbins with the Delcon Shield, that's a very famous case because top executives actually ended up in court and convicted of falsifying test research so that they could release the Delcon Shield onto the American public, where hundreds of thousands of American women suffered severe pelvic inflammatory diseases. Delcon Shield was a contraceptive device, right? After that was exposed, the American government bought all of the surplus, remainder Delcon Shields in bulk, unsterilized containers, shipped them onto the third world where, the lower hygiene and the, less access to medicine and hospitalization meant that millions of third world women died directly from the actions of corporate criminals in A.H. Robbins and collusion with the US government. Right? Now, am I being a conspiracy theorist to say, well, there's a conspiracy happening here? And I mean, again, this is just the tip of the iceberg. You could go and you could write, people have written books about this, lots of books about this. And then, of course, the next thing is, well, do we trust the media? Even the history books. I mean, people are pretty aware at the moment, from what I gather, that, the media sold everyone after the Second World War, the media sold everyone the line that Hiroshima and Nagasaki saved millions of lives because they stopped the war faster than what would have happened, which was complete lies. And in fact, it was just testing two different detonating devices for the atomic bombs. And you know what I mean? You think that the history books are telling us the truth? Am I a conspiracy theorist to say, well, no, actually the history books will tell us that that particular information is a lie? You know what I mean? So, I mean, who's being rational here? People that trust the government, people that trust the corporations, people that trust the media, when I don't remember the exact figure, but I think it's something like 85% of the mainstream media is owned by three people, and at the moment, I just learned the other day that the Washington Post is bought by Bezos, who owns Amazon, Fox News, who are a little bit of a joke, I suppose, but I mean, they're the only media outlet that is saying anything at all to try and, challenge the standard line about the COVID-19 protocol that's going on around the world, right? And apparently, according to them, they're the only TV station in America that isn't owned by internet moguls like Bezos or Soros, not Soros, Google, or these internet conglomerates, and I mean, that's the thing, am I being a conspiracy theorist because I understand that the media is manipulating us, having seen so much censorship, so-called fact-checking and things like this, and I mean, again, people would say, well, no, they're actually doing their job, and yet apparently right now as we speak, Zuckerberg, Facebook, and 3 fact-checkers are being sued for censorship by the American government, for censorship, by falsely stopping news getting out there,
Well, they can't really call themselves a public platform if they're, there's a line between, hate speech and free speech. That I think, this is a topic that's been explored for a while. And at the moment, like what kind of content do we not want to see on Facebook? But, when you've got someone claiming to be, or an entity claiming to be a public, speech platform, and then they're actively censoring, conversations that challenge the mainstream narrative. I mean, really all they're doing is they're just showing their colors, aren't they? I mean, they're just showing that they're another arm of the management system that's in place. And so, the media, like the TV stations, the state media here in New Zealand, are essentially an information dispensation arm of the government because they're owned by the state. And then the corporate media, being like TV3 and that, are obviously the corporate owned. And then there's but they're telling pretty much the same stories in a lot of way, with a slightly bit of a twist here and there. But generally speaking, in New Zealand, I mean, as you know, we don't have a huge swathe of them, although we do have internet television and Sky TV. But generally speaking, a lot of these places all get their news from the same source, especially international news. They all get the facts from Reuters or from the Associated Press, which we know are wholly owned by the likes of the Rothschild, Rockefellers, and all that sort of thing. And they're basically just reading a script. And there's been evidence of this. There was a show on called Conan O'Brien Show, which is a American TV talk show where Conan gets up and introduces a short segment where he plays a video of about 30 state broadcasters who are all reading the same script. It is very enlightening because they are literally reading word for word the same script with their kind of own personality involved. So it's like the reality TV shows as well. I met a guy who was he was a musician, and he was also a script writer for reality shows. Think about that for a moment. A script writer for a reality show. That's an oxymoron.
Yeah, isn't it? But this is the thing, is that you say a very important point is, where do we draw the line? Okay, what is allowable? Okay, now I saw a post on Facebook the other day where somebody complained because there was a post, a photograph posted of someone chopping off a policeman's head, and there was blood and guts and all of this sort of thing, and they complained about it, and Facebook said this does not contravene our community standards. Okay, so again, it's showing their colors, isn't it? And I remember years ago in New Zealand, I don't know if you're old enough to remember a program with Selwyn Toogood called Beauty and the Beast, where it was sort of a talk show. People would write in, and it was sort of like an aunt agony, aunt. Sorry,
I remember Selwyn Toogood, but I don't remember that show. No.
Okay. Anyway, there was someone wrote in about David Irving, who's the so-called Holocaust denier, which he isn't at all a Holocaust denier. Okay. And Pam Corkery was on the show in her early days, who's a New Zealand became a New Zealand politician, yes. And she worked also for New Zealand National Radio. In the days when you used to get some interesting stuff, some non-censored stuff. And she... and I was quite young when I saw this, so I think I was probably mid-teens, and she said something that really hit me, struck me. And she said, well, because they were talking about how David Irving had been banned. And I think the consensus of the letter and the rest of the panel was that that was good. And she came out and said, no, why? How do we know what the truth is unless we hear a lie? And it was like, when Plato says that we are reminded of truths. And that was like the first time I'd heard something like that. And it was just like I'd been reminded of some truth that I'd been born with, and then it had been programmed out of me. This is exactly Plato and the idea of the cave, that we're just looking at the shadows and not reality itself, and that is without question something like in the JFK case, when you get the examiners starting with their conclusion and then marshalling the evidence to suit that, which happens all the time in universities, It happens all the time that, professors will want to say this particular conclusion. They've got their conclusion. In fact, when you write a thesis, before you even start it, you have to have your conclusion. This says a lot about our education system, actually. Then you write
that what you just said about creating a conclusion and then tailor-making the journey of the information to reach that conclusion.
And I mean, this is actually the standard procedure for academia, is that you come up with your conclusion.
Madness, man.
Right, first, and then you sort of say, well, and this is the way, this is the path that I'm going to get that's going to bring me to that conclusion.
It's like if you're aware of the trivium method, it's almost like the trivium backwards. It's like, the knowledge comes after your understanding, which cannot happen.
Right.
You have to have the knowledge first and then develop the understanding. But I'm going to start with my understanding and then make the knowledge fit my understanding.
Yeah. I mean, the thing is that you should be changing your conclusions all the time. If you really are a rational, free-thinking person, I think now that the single bullet is possible. And that's only a week old for me. Before 1 week ago, I would have told you straight out, nah, that was just impossible. Now I think it's possible. I still don't think it's likely, but I'm forever, refining my conclusions, right? Never come out with a conclusion first, and then tailor all of my evidence, my argument so that it fits that conclusion, right? So that's one thing that really is a red flag for a conspiracy theorist, right? And the other thing is that things that are banned, if you want, whoever is banned, read it, and as it happens, a couple of years, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, because I hadn't really encountered David Irving, much. He's the so-called conspiracy theorist who's also supposed to be anti-Semitic, and yet, as it happens, he has a lot of Jews who are supporting him financially and helping him, because they see that what he is doing is bringing the truth into a world where the history of the Second World War has been just lies. I mean, it's not just the idea of dropping the atomic bomb, saved millions of lives. That's just the tip of the iceberg for the lies that have been promulgated about the Second World War, and of course, before he wrote Hitler's War, all right, David Irving was well respected as a internationally top historian. He was in fact often called as expert witnesses in trials for his knowledge of history. He had written books. His first book was on Dresden, the bombing of Dresden, which is a war crime. And that was his first book, which just threw him straight into sort of the limelight as far as being, a person that was going around interviewing people in Dresden, because he lived in Germany, he spoke German, so he was able to do the coal-face research. You know what I mean? He's the only historian that's going to all of the different archives around the world, in Russia and in America and things like that, and actually getting all of the documents instead of just quoting each other, which all the other historians are doing, right? And then all of a sudden he wrote Hitler's War with information that he received, by being the only historian that's going into the archives and actually reading the first, the primary sources, if you like, what we'd call as an historian a primary source, And then, of course, he's sort of uncovered the fact that the history books are wrong about. He's not denying that the Holocaust would happen. I don't want to get too controversial here because I think that's a rabbit hole that people can choose for themselves whether they want to go down. But it didn't happen in the way that it was recorded to have happened. Okay, yeah. I mean, there's still a lot of they haven't censored. Well, I mean, I was watching his videos 2 or 3 years ago on YouTube, and at that time you could still see them. And anyway, so I mean, Winston Churchill is nothing like what he is. As history has explained him to be. I mean, David Irving said some really radical stuff. I mean, and I mean, there's no reason to think that someone will put their career on the line and even, perhaps, be open to threats from people, like perhaps even put their life on the line, perhaps not so much with him, but certainly there are cases where so-called conspiracy theorists, I mean, why are they doing this? Why are so-called conspiracy theorists challenging the mainstream narrative, putting their own careers on the line, possibly risking getting, taken out, if it wasn't for the fact that they want the truth to come forward, and they see things, like the bombing of Hiroshima as a lie, for example, and they see that all of these lies have filled our history books, and they want to actually tell the truth about it,
Yeah, and on this, like I'm a fully grown man for the most part. Okay, I have a reasonable level of emotional maturity. I can dispassionately engage with information without going off and doing radical things. Sure, I might have some what might be called radical ideas and concepts and things, but hey, to all the people out there that are censoring and curating and manicuring the information because they feel that society's far too infantile to handle it, you're part of the damn problem, because you assume that you are the arbiters of information. It is your right to decide what we can interact with. You are not mistaken, because you're not mistaken. You are actively curtailing the evolution of humanity, and you are the problem because you assume that we can't handle it, and some probably can't, but that's not my responsibility. My responsibility is me and developing my level of scholarship, emotional maturity across the board. And I take that as my responsibility, and I will expose myself to the information. People tell me, why are you looking at this stuff, Phil? And I'm like, going, truth and wisdom, baby. What else is there really? And I got to go to places that I might not want to go, but I want the full picture, because when I'm standing on solid knowledge, I have courage. Fear disappears with knowledge. This is my own discovery. And I just wanted to say, like, this infantile way that we can't expose ourselves to it because we can't manage ourselves because we're such delicate, fragile, imperfect, flawed sort of images of the creator. If that's I'm sort of wandering off here, but I almost find it like insulting to my intelligence, to get told that there's people out there making decisions on my behalf that affect me, that are more intelligent than me.
Yeah, I mean, this is a huge step backwards. I mean, the whole, there are certain characteristics of the modern era. And one of them is that we were supposed to be more in charge of our own life. Is the easiest, the easiest way to put it. I'm not going to go into huge big details about the state and the modern, the idea of the modern state and the individual and all of this, the body corporate, if you like. But one of the characteristics, this is John Stuart Mill, for example, and I guess really the 20th century has seen, and of course, this is again part of the positive. One of the healthier aspects of positivism, 19th century scientific materialism, not being so, and technology, industrial technology being some of the sort of darker elements. But one of the sort of more positive elements is the idea that, the 19th century idea that, people will be more individual, be allowed to. And in fact, Nietzsche actually saw it all coming. He saw it all coming. He saw that it was just a show, and he saw that, in fact, what they're doing is they're just, going to use all of this to control us, which when, you understand about Skinner and behavioralism and the book that he wrote, Ward on 2, which is all about social engineering, effectively, to cut a long story short. And that's effectively what's happened from the start of the 20th century, is that, like, psychology as a science started in the 1880s with Wilhelm Wundt in Leipzig University. And ever since then, psychology has been used by the powers that be, sometimes very overtly, to do nothing more than just control the masses, You see what I mean? And that's what they're doing. When they want to be nice about it, they'll talk about paternalism. In other words, the state is, your auntie. Oh, Uncle Sam. That's where the whole image of Uncle Sam comes from, is that we're going to look after you, The
motherland,
and when you
the
look
fatherland.
At the ongoing evolution of human consciousness, we should be heading towards more autonomy.
Yes.
Right? We should be heading towards more individual responsibility, right? But it seems that there is, I suppose, a conspiracy, if you like, that, the state doesn't want that. The state wants to be controlling us. Whether it's the state, a friend of mine said that we've got this sort of Schrodinger's state at the moment, or a situation like Schrodinger, where the state is inept and incompetent, but there is somehow some sort of overarching, higher power that's still controlling us, which is actually, funnily enough, quite a good way to look at it, because what's happening is that the puppets, the politicians are completely incompetent. In fact, I look at the candidates for 2020 in the election in the United States, this year, and I just shake my head at how is it possible that these are the two best people that a country of 300 odd million people can put forward to run their country. I just can't believe it.
What is your speculation as to why those people have been put out in front? Why would you put something out like that?
Is that because they are easy to manipulate, perhaps even want to be manipulated, perhaps are even colluding willingly, how did Obama get from $1.3 million in wealth to something like $80 million in 8 years when he was on a $400,000 salary?
Yeah, right. They've all got a golden handshake waiting for them once they've hooked their mates up. That's what happened here in New Zealand with the likes.
The other side of it is, right, who possibly would deny that the corporations are running the government when the corporations are paying for the election campaigns? Why are corporations putting millions of dollars into the election campaigns for all the political parties? Corporations invest money. They don't give money away. They invest money, and they certainly aren't going to be giving money away to politicians without expecting a return.
No, that's right. You don't. You think about the amount of money that these corporations spend on advertising, and it seems almost disproportionate, but they're fully aware of the influence of advertisement and propaganda and information to steer people's purchasing decisions, to help them to create purchasing decisions that they would not otherwise likely make. And that's in essence, I'm sure that you have a reasonably good understanding of the work of, say, like Edward Bernays and some of the tricks that he's pulled in past. You want to talk about conspiracy theory, and you can bring up some of his stories and show just how easily the bewildered masses can be corralled and get to perform tricks.
This is why I want to just, because that's an important point that I wanted to elaborate on, right? This is why they want to push this line of the random universe, and especially the last bastion, or the last frontier of what's a random universe is people's behavior because of free will, and yet these people know exactly how to manipulate populations, how to program populations, and the fact is that it works. So that's the evidence that, in fact, people are not as open to free will as much as what they believe. In fact, if people don't accept that there's a huge amount of programming inside you that you have to actually deal with, then you're completely open to the programming. It's only the people that actually understand that, oh, well, I've got to actually start unpacking all this programming, who actually end up starting to unpack all that programming. You have no defense of it if you think, oh, no, that's just crazy conspiracy theory stuff, that we're programmed.
Yeah. What is it? The fish doesn't know water until it learns to jump. It doesn't know that it's swimming in the sea until it learns to jump and go, oh my gosh, there's something else going on out here. But
yeah.
My name is Phil Rice, and I'm a reformed mind control victim.
Reforming, because there's always more and more that we're reforming. And
there's layers, man. Constantly.
Yeah. Oh, we've been going for just over an hour. I think we could probably open it up to some questions. I bet there would be at least one or two people that might want to ask us a question. I mean, I'm not saying that we necessarily have to end our discussion here. But
I'll put a thing out now. I've been asking, but nobody's been commenting. So look, if anyone out in the audience now would like to pose a question, now would be a really great time because we're open to it. And while we're waiting for questions in the chat, I have something for Steve as well, and that is that I kind of feel after watching a lot of these mainstream stories that whether it's a school shooting or the Vegas shooting or the any of these shootings, even the JFK thing, from what I've seen, and I've had it explained to me as well this way, and I've kind of come to this conclusion a bit myself too, is that it's always seems to be a focus on a lone wolf, even when there may be reports of a second or third person there. It's almost like, and John Rappaport talks about this. He talks about this is partly the war on individualism or individuality, and that is like if you stand outside of the crowd, this could be you, sort of thing. And so it's the same with this conversation about when a story about a person who's been keeping kids locked in his basement or something like that. It's always the one-off, but you never hear about so much the rings of people that congregate, which is, even though that's actually in the news right now, but.
Well, it's not really. Actually, that's another good point that I'm glad that you brought up, is that, I mean, I suppose we probably might as well get a bit controversial, but I mean, this idea that we've locked down the whole world for something where 500,000 people worldwide, or less than that, has died, right? Something like 100,000 people in America or something like that, you know what I mean? This is crazy, and we hear about it all the time. We're absolutely bombarded. Any doctor, and there's hundreds of doctors that want to give an alternative opinion, they're censored, they're blacklisted, they're ridiculed, you know what I mean? And they're not allowed to speak. They're literally actually not allowed to speak. They're fact-checked falsely, saying that, these, how do you say it, hydroxychloroquine or whatever. Yeah, that one. They'll stop a whole broadcast that's talking about many issues, like, for example, that the schools in America are saying, defund the police and we'll open. Right? So they're using their position in this situation politically to push a left-wing idea, a Democrat idea of this whole idea of defunding the police, right? And then it's all about it's being blocked or fact-checked or whatever, generally blocked because of this drug that, first of all, has been admitted by many people can help in the early stages. Can help with the symptoms. It might not cure the virus, but it helps with the symptoms, and it certainly isn't dangerous. It's been accepted for a long time that it's not dangerous, right? And yet these doctors are talking about all sorts of issues, how lockdown has got psychological ramifications and stress and depression and things like this, how wearing masks is actually quite ineffective for the general public, all of these sorts of issues, right, are being discussed by these doctors, and they're being silenced because they made the mistake of talking about this drug as well, you know? And I mean, like I said before, the whole idea that something is censored means we should be listening to that. If as soon as it's censored, we should be listening to that. You know?
Yeah, right there. Right. You know, if any, you know, it's almost like telling you what you want to look at.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like going, it's like, you know, because censorship's almost like, you know, just like burning books. And so it's like going, well, those are the books that I want to read because these people are, you know, I think something else that's interesting for me too is to realize how people always talk about the politicians and say, well, you know, they're not, you know, they're not perfect. They're humans and blah, 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 doodly do. And all that. And it's like, you know, they're doing the best they can. And it's like going, yeah, my kind of view is that they're kind of temporary employees of the state that get recycled every few years or every couple of cycles, whatever. And then, but what, you know, people aren't talking about these groups in the background that stick around, these entrenched groups. So these people out the front, they're, you know, taking medical advice from politicians and from news media who have their, you know, you don't think scientists can be paid off? What freaking planet are you on, right?
Yeah, so, I mean, the medical profession is full of examples where scientists are being paid off or who are working for an agenda. You know, I mean, I'll give you an example. I'll give you two. I'll start with a short one. A guy, and I can't remember his name. I haven't got the. What advice would you give to someone who feels that they may be a conspiracy theorist? Okay, I'll get straight to that, okay, after I just finish this little bit, all right? Okay, a guy who was actually the head of the FDA, the Federal Drug Association.
Food and Drug Administration,
Yeah, the Food and Drug Administration, that's right, okay, who is there supposedly to monitor drugs being safe and all of this sort of thing and keep tabs on the pharma firms, came out after he resigned and said they're doing the exact opposite. It's not at all doing anything to do with protecting people from unsafe drugs, which of course is evidenced by the fact that unsafe drugs are being released all over the place. That's why they have got their what's it called, where they can't be sued for the vaccine, you know?
The immunity. I know what you mean, yeah.
Sued, right? And in fact, the FDA exists solely to protect the profits of the pharma firms, right? We'll get to these questions and then.
I've got another one. So, cool. Let's roll in, brother.
So, all right. What advice would you give to someone who feels they might be a conspiracy theorist? Boo boo monkey. Okay. What advice? Well, good. Carry on. Question everything, including the conspiracies that you are being exposed to, right? And despite the rhetoric of the random universe, see if it fits a bigger picture, right? In other words, does this make sense? In other words, for example, I've talked about that, you know, corporations are murderers, which they are. You know, they will deliberately and willfully murder people. The drug companies are the worst. In criminology, they say straight out, the bigger the company, the more criminal they are. And the drug companies who are tied to the oil firms are the biggest, right? So stick with that. Stick with like a big picture. It's not a random universe. We're not living in a random universe, okay? And in fact, there is absolutely agendas happening out there. The FDA is part of that. They are part of the agenda of making sure that pharmaceutical companies don't get sued any more than is, you know, absolutely desperately necessary to make some sort of show that they are being supervised, right? They are there primarily to keep the profits going for the pharmaceutical companies. And of course, pharmaceutical companies are giving lots of money to governments and politicians, you know, probably privately, but certainly to fund, you know, election campaigns. You know what I mean? So keep going, because I mean it's all part of the spiritual thing. This is what I was going to mention before, is that this comes into spiritual alchemy, because in fact we're waking up, the more you learn about yourself, right, and start unpacking the programming that has been placed upon us, and your eyes start opening, and then you actually see the world differently, and you can see that these agendas are operating out there. Okay,
Cool. And
so
if
it's
I might
very
just,
much part of it. For me, at least, it's very much part of your spiritual walk, is to be aware of these things. And again, back to the idea of that, why should we let the governments control us? This is the fact that I'm an alternative lifestyle. I'm a conspiracy lifestyler, and part of that is that I know that the governments are out to get us. I'm not paranoid. They're out to get us. You know what I mean? And I live my life as much as I can outside of that government control, outside of the governments being able to control me. I mean, obviously, there's huge compromises that we have to make, especially in Germany. Okay, so
could I just jump in and give my
sure. Sorry.
Sorry. So what I wanted to say is, so what advice would you give to someone who feels they might be a conspiracy theorist? Well, chances are that something has caught your attention. This is the name of my show, Thread to Threshold. You've come across a small thread of information that's made you question something that most people might take as being, well, that's just the way it is. That's the way it's always been, or something of that ilk. Chances are something doesn't seem right. Now, it's the responsibility of the individual who has this experience to follow this up, to follow that thread, to take on the responsibility of researching that, to decide for themselves, to make an informed decision, applying due diligence, absorbing the knowledge dispassionately, letting an understanding develop, because you can't just expect just to, an understanding is different from the ability to recollect names, places, place names, addresses, things like that. An understanding is something that you get that happens in the background. Okay, so when you're going out looking, you take in you're diligent. You know what, there's something not right about this, and I'm going to inform myself to the point where I'm going to cross that threshold of, what, do I adopt this into my worldview or not as being the truth? And so yeah, it's like Steve said. Basically, you just got to go out there and search. And you're basically you're gonna research yourself to the point where you believe it's true, or that you've actually debunked it is a myth, or it is it isn't the truth. It's a falsity based on the current level of information. And in this current age of information, ignorance is a choice. Nescience, which is the non-existence of the information, that's no longer an excuse. If you don't know something, it's because you have not placed it in front of yourself yet. So that would be my response, is that if you know something's not right, then go look for it, so that you can show yourself and feel confident. Because when you're confident about something, you can stand on that soapbox and say, look, this shit ain't right, and I'm completely solid about how I feel about this because I've done the damn work. I've got this information I have is hard-won knowledge. I didn't just read a post or look at the top 10 results. I went into this, and it's very empowering. This is something I've discovered for myself. So sorry, that was my part in there.
Yes, thanks.
Here's the next question. But sorry, if you want to add to that.
That's all right. That's fine. Influence wants their children. This is actually this is where I get to the next part of my own personal revelation here of how I turned into a conspiracy theorist. And for those who don't know my history, I was had a very I was subjected to a lot of abuse as a child, and I had a subconscious kind of rebellion to my stepfather, who I thought for most of, till I was about 30, I thought he was my father. And he came clean one day that he wasn't my father. And anyway, my stepfather was very dominant culture type of person, and this is actually how I started onto the alternative route because of a subconscious rebellion against his lifestyle, right? And the reason that I've mentioned this in connection to this question is that most parents are dominant culture people because, especially as parents, they want to build their nest and have their children in that nest, which for all intents and purposes, unless you're prepared to make some big not only sacrifices but very risky moves. It's actually, if you try and step outside the dominant culture, you're going to have a hard road for it. And most people want their child to do well in the dominant culture. I guess really they've just been programmed into the dominant culture themselves, and then they see this is the direction the dominant culture is going in the education system, and therefore I will encourage my children in that same way, like to count to 10 or whatever example. I actually have told my children that reading and writing and arithmetic, funnily enough, are very important things, and they really need to do as well as they can. But we actually focus a lot with our children on showing them about alternative medicines. In fact, we have a small business growing and selling alternative medicines. We're going to start making tinctures and teas and other things like that. And our children help us a lot. I'm also teaching our children not only about animals and the gardening in general, but also about construction from demolition material and things like that. We live in an old house here in Germany, and we've turned old garages into chicken coops and your pens and things like that. And, we've got animals, quite a few animals, and stuff like this. So I'm teaching them about rejuvenating soils. I'm teaching them about all sorts of alternative things because I have my own sort of values outside of the dominant culture. But I think that the vast majority of people are quite happy with the dominant culture, quite happy with the material trinkets that they have been rewarded with their loyalty to the dominant culture. Can't imagine another world that isn't, in the same industrial technology and consumerism and things like this. And so therefore, obviously, and another reason why conspiracy theory is ringing the alarm bells for these people is that the conspiracy theorists generally will see that, well, we're at the end of an age, and it's sort of like a lolly scramble for the diminishing pie that is there after the Second World War. There was a lot of pie. There was a lot of cake out there. And so, we could have social welfare and we could have full employment and all of this sort of thing. But that pie is getting smaller and smaller and smaller now. And it's like a grab. You know what I mean? And of course, eventually, like as I said at the very start, every kingdom rises and every kingdom falls. And we are in the dying breaths of the current era. There's no question of that, and maybe I'm wrong, although I doubt it.
I agree with you. It's palpable, it's tangible in my opinion.
I think that right now is more than ever tangible, that this is the end of this era. I'm not saying
this is a global event. This is not a
event. Well, that's the difference in this end of this era, this kingdom, if you like, that's collapsing at the moment, is that it is globalized. And that's the first one that we know of. Like when the Egyptian Empire rose and fell, or the Romans, or the Greeks, or the, whatever, that was that one, as the Babylonian kingdom fell, the Egyptian rose, sort of thing, And quite often you have a dark age in between, in fact. So we're probably going to have a short dark age, 5-6 generations or something like that, maybe 2 or 3 generations of a dark age, And I'm actually telling my kids that, carry on with the dominant culture and on the off chance that it carries on, but be prepared in case it doesn't. So I hope that, I'm not sure if I fully understood your question, but to finish off what I was saying about myself, and my own starting point. Okay, there were many things that I subconsciously rebelled against. My stepfather was a very, very hard-nosed, sort of openly incompassionate person who didn't care about poor people, didn't care about anyone basically. And during especially my 20s, I was the social justice warrior of all social justice warriors, an extreme bleeding heart liberal. And through my own unpacking this programming and understanding that a lot of who I am in my 20s and 30s, I was going through this process, and a lot of who I am is just in reaction to my own upbringing. I ended up rationally unpacking this sort of social justice warrior mentality that I had. And I'm not a social justice warrior at all. I'm not a bleeding heart liberal at all now. Because I realized partly that was in reaction to my stepfather, subconscious reaction against his lifestyle, against his identity. And not that I am incompassionate, not that I don't care about people, because I do, but I have come to my own rational answer that being a social justice warrior is not an effective way to help people who might need help, like ethnic minorities or people who are disenfranchised. It's not a very effective way to help them, as evidenced by the fact that social justice warriors haven't done a great deal to help these people. And secondly, these people don't want that type of help. They don't want, like one of the things that, the whole gay and lesbian movement and transsexual movement, this sort of rainbow thing, whatever it's called, pride movement or whatever. One thing that's come out into the open about that is that a lot of these people who they are jumping up and down for, right, don't want to be in the limelight. They don't want to, they actually would rather just be left alone. Thank you very much. Don't go out there, pleading my case and being a social justice warrior for me. Okay, I'm quite happy making my own way in the world without someone, condescending to me effectively because I can't look after myself. Back to this paternalism, Phil.
Yeah.
Because I can't look after myself, you're going to look after me for me, sort of thing. So I hope I answered your question, Gino.
Yeah, I guess there was quite a bit in that, but needless to be context. If we look at the question again, any thoughts as to why parents seem to innately adopt? It's because they were taught this way in a sense, and I guess they're just passing on what they know, and it's part maybe how they derive self-worth or validation for themselves being a good parent is that they're carrying on what they know in a sense, and maybe we've always done it this way, so that's why we want to make sure that the kids can learn to count and so on. I mean, when I look at the process known as the quadrivium, one of the learning systems of the older days of, you learn arithmetic, then you learn geometry, then you learn music, then you learn astronomy. The reason why you got to do them in order. The reason you learn arithmetic is because you need to learn how to understand the concept and the construct of the numbering and the metric of some kind of metric to it's like how you can do stuff in the world and make sense of it, to rationalize it. And then geometry is applying those numbers to form and how we can kind of measure space. And then music is how we can become innately familiar with measuring time. And then learning astronomy is about observing how three-dimensional objects move through space and time. And so these things all play into each other. But when you start turning them around the other way, but anyway, I'm getting off topic here. But to answer Gino's question, I would say that you're probably far more qualified to answer this as myself, being a psychologist and being as well read you are. But my own response to that would be, well, I guess it's because people are just following not the lockstep, but the the general traditional model of dad taught me this, so I'll teach this to my son as well, or so on. Just a sort of
Yeah, I think that's how you end up with, and this again comes back to the idea of the so-called random universes. I mean, I don't know how they get away with pushing this idea that we're living in a random universe.
Well, that people keep swallowing it.
Yeah. I mean, that's what I mean. How they get away with pushing it because people keep swallowing it, But I mean, who believes in a random universe? I mean, the whole idea of culture. I mean, it's like when you have a rose tree, right? You culture that rose tree to grow the way you want it, don't you? Effectively, isn't that right? I mean, and that's what the word means, isn't it? In the sense that we're using. I mean, you could talk about a bacteria culture if you wanted to, which is probably a closer analogy to what we have. But I mean, when you culture, it's like a culturation, you're culturing someone into your culture. You're culturing them to be part of that. So, you know what I mean? It's like, how is this random? How is this just some, it's sort of like this existentialist idea, this Jean-Paul Sartre and all these people after the war where they just couldn't understand how that war could happen. And in fact, the two world wars are very much part of the bigger conspiracy, I guess in a way I have to mention this because there's a huge amount of stuff I wanted to talk about that I didn't get to. I want to mention this, okay, and you probably want to bring this up, Phil, on a website, but the Balfour Declaration is the central axis of all conspiracy theory, as far as I'm aware, apart from the reptile alien conspiracy theories.
I'm going to bring up the Wikipedia here, guys. Sorry to interrupt you, Steve. I'm going to bring up Wikipedia.
Yeah, that's fine. That's good.
Which is a notoriously controlled interface. You do not rely on Wikipedia for your scholarship. It definitely goes on the information pile, people, but seriously, don't rely on Wikipedia. Is it's a have. But anyway, just because it's publicly available. There's plenty of people out there that would argue that because they've got their own profiles on Wikipedia, which are complete fallacies and lies. So that's okay.
Yeah.
So
anyways, I mean, I'm sure that. Yeah, I haven't found anything. Okay, so in short, the Balfour Declaration was that's it. Good. That's it. Good. Yeah. That's excellent. Right. Stop. Dear Lord Rothschild. Right? Everyone can read that, can't they?
Go on, read it out. You've got a lovely voice.
Okay. I have much pleasure in conveying to you, on behalf of His Majesty's government, the following declaration of sympathy with Jewish Zionist aspirations, which has been submitted to and approved by the Cabinet. Okay, and then it quotes the Cabinet. I presume that's quoting the Cabinet. His Majesty's government view with favour the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people, and will use their best endeavours to facilitate the achievement of this object. It being clearly understood that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities. It's shocking indictment when you think about that.
Yeah.
This was written in 1917, by the way. Okay, this Balfour Declaration. So I just finished reading it. It may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine, or the rights and political status enjoyed by Jews in any other country. I should be grateful if you would bring this declaration to the knowledge of the Zionist Federation. The original letter from Balfour, who was a minor politician in the British Parliament, 1917.
Here it is, 2nd of November, 1917.
Yeah. So the war wasn't even over. The First World War wasn't even over. Here's a very small piece of false history that I'll add in here. Okay. The First World War was fought for this. That was the reason. But that's not the small piece. The small piece I was going to give you is that Germany didn't lose the First World War. Okay, the First World War was a stalemate. That's why it's called the Versailles Treaty. You don't have a treaty after a war when someone's lost. They didn't have a treaty after the Second World War. That's why Germany was so upset at the huge effect that the Versailles Treaty had after the First World War because they didn't lose it. Oh, okay, good. Dominant culture, yeah.
Good phrase. Good,
I mean,
good term, that one.
yeah. I mean, I think I probably got that at university when I was studying criminology.
I just want
Dominant
to throw
culture.
something else in too. I've heard Graham Hancock use another term which is very similar called the dominator culture. The
Yeah,
culture
well, he's
dominator.
probably taken it from dominant culture because that's the
Yeah,
term sociologists use, and he's probably just put his own gloss on that.
yeah.
But yeah, sociologists use that term dominant culture. And then, of course, you get Theodore Roszak, The Making of the Counterculture, which is a fantastic book. And then, you also get things like Steve Tipton's book, Being Saved from the 60s, which talks about how some of the New Age movement actually brought the hippies, the counterculture, back into the dominant culture, which was effectively, you could talk about, I talked about before with JFK, how I have sort of loosened up on my conspiracy theory slightly by admitting that it's possible that the single bullet could have happened. I've actually tightened up more on my conspiracy theory idea of that the New Age movement is a psyop. The New Age movement is a deliberate dumbing down of the people. Steve Tipton's book, Getting Saved from the 60s, actually shows with a few case studies. It's not so comprehensive to cover the whole New Age, but it does show with a few case studies how these people brought millions of young Americans, usually Americans, back into the dominant culture who were, sort of kind of hippie type counterculture people, Yeah, but I
Yeah,
mean, I've mentioned.
sorry, I just
So
just jump in there. That's what you've said about that. I mean, as soon as these large movements start up, they are, of course, every single time they are infiltrated, they have plants and agents, counterintelligence agents put in there, because all you need to do is get control of one of these movements and you can steer the direction of it using, psychology. Ladies and gentlemen, it's all about psychology. It really is. Once they have your mind, this is why your mind is so important, why the food you put in your body is so important, because that's going to affect your cognitive capacities. But, I just wanted to mention on the New Age thing that there's a commentator, presenter, author, and speaker, Mark Passio, he's got a presentation called New Age Bullshit. And basically what he's saying is that the New Age is at the point, the faulty, flimsy, not to throw a complete blanket over it, because there are certainly some good teachings in that arena. But what's happened is that ultimately they're saying, sit down. He calls it stand down. Like don't do anything, don't take action.
yeah, that's what the New Age is, isn't it? Isn't it? The New Age is just like it's all an illusion.
Meditate yourself into the perfect world.
Yeah. It's all an illusion, and if something bad happens to you, it's because you're thinking the wrong things.
Yeah.
That's like saying, the Holocaust, because there was actually, a lot of millions of Jews were murdered. And it's like saying that those Jews were murdered because, they were thinking the wrong thoughts. It's like victim blaming. This idea. As much as I have in a previous video of myself, I have in fact said that in our day-to-day life, what is going on around us is an external reflection of what's going on inside us. That's true, right? With my relationship with my dogs and my children and my partner or whoever, But to think that, the Nazi tanks are rolling into my village right now because I'm thinking the wrong thoughts. It's just ridiculous. This is Jean-Paul Sartre again, these existentialists, man. They're actually the start of, not necessarily the start, but they certainly had a huge impact on the New Age movement, the existentialists. And, I mean, Sartre came out and said, this is my war. Of course, he was famous for fighting in the French underground during the Second World War, Sartre, okay? He was famous as a philosopher because he fought in the French underground in the Second World War. And he said, this is my war. I created this war. because that's part of this whole random universe, and that we don't have any inherent self and all of this is also solipsism, actually, is that we're creating our own universe, and this is very big in the New Age movement, and I mean, he didn't create it. Yeah, it's absolute solipsism.
Yeah.
In other words, I'm the only thing that exists in the universe, and everything else is just a reflection of me.
There is no objective truth. I am the arbiter of what is right and wrong, and of these.
This is another part of this whole subjectivity and relativism, and especially moral relativism. That's Nietzsche is hijacked for in service of this idea that there's no morality, no objective morality, which is not at all what Nietzsche was saying. See, these are all the things that tie in together, and it's like, is this all random? Have we gone in this trajectory, this intellectual trajectory? Have we done this randomly, or is there some sort of agenda and conspiracy, behind the fact that Nietzsche was hijacked? Nietzsche, who was highly moral, had high moral standards, and in fact, the book that's called in English Beyond Good and Evil, right? In German, it's Jenseits der Good und Böse. Good und Böse. Jenseits means on the other side of, right? It's a better, I mean that could be beyond, right? I mean, it's not saying necessarily it's a bad translation, but in German, the idea of Jenseits, then Good und Böse, it means the other side of, on the other side of. In other words, what he's saying is, again, like God, when he said God is dead, he didn't say God is dead. He explained, described the Judeo-Christian God and said that God is dead, right? And it's the same with Beyond Good and Evil, or, the other side of good and evil, right? In Daybreak, which was the next book that he wrote, he said, this book is about the destruction of morality. This is in the absolute introduction, the first things he's saying. This book is about the destruction of morality. Why? For morality's sake. In other words, the morality, even then at the end of the 19th century, said all of our morality is built on corporations and consumerism, effectively, right? That's what he said. All of our morality is built. Sorry, I just wanted to finish and say that, we've got to get some decent morality into our life. That's what Nietzsche was saying. Nietzsche wasn't saying that there's no such thing as morality, that it's all subjective. He wasn't saying that at all. He was saying that it's far too subjective at the moment, and it's a false morality. That's what he was saying, So how is it that Nietzsche has been hijacked, manipulated, and used, right, press-ganged into the service of existentialism? Like Søren Kierkegaard is also considered to be one of the grandfathers of existentialism, press-ganged into the service of this 20th century nihilism, narcissism, this whole idea of that anything goes, if it's my thinking, and then in the end, what do they say? You got to do this, you got to do that, and if you can't watch that, you can't listen to that. You know what I mean? So it's all contradictory. This is another thing. Boo Boo Monkey said, what's my advice? Don't have contradictory ideas, Don't believe that there's a random universe and then expect, or learn about how to plant an apple seed and get an apple tree. You know what I mean? Make sure that things are consistent.
And just right there, deciding for yourself. Could you just turn your volume down?
Me?
Yeah, it's feeding back through. I'll just talk a bit quietly. I just want to say too that, choosing, establishing your worldview, people, you build it up over time, and you create the lens that you perceive the world through the attainment and understanding of knowledge, and that. But this idea that oh crap, I've lost my train of thought. We are essentially here to improve upon ourselves, and if we just take secondhand information and take that as gospel, I think we're doing ourselves a little bit of a disservice. Like I use a musical metaphor for this, because when I first started learning to play guitar, I was learning all the songs that I liked, and then that got me interested in the band. And then I found out what their influences were like. And that led me back to, say, the music, the blues music and the jazz music and things like that. And I think the same is with knowledge too, is that when you read the commentaries of modern writers, there's a difference between reading a translation if you're not up to translating it yourself. But, the way, if we're just reading the commentators of the commentators, so to speak, and not reviewing the classics in a sense ourselves, this is something I've been speaking to you about privately, Steve. I've started exploring more of the classics, is that, we're really adopting somebody else's view when we're reading a book that they've written about something else, because they can steer that information to some sort of, bias or otherwise. And I think, taking personal responsibility for, and that's what we were talking about, sorry, is it's your choice. And I think establishing, if everyone in the audience right now makes a decision, do we live in what's your worldview? Do we live in a random material world of random bumping particles? Is that our universe? Or do we live in a vibrant, alive, purposeful, self-correcting, in a sense that we can use that word, it does have a self-correcting nature to it. Which way do you want to go? Because really, if you sit in the middle, you're actually not helping. Take up a side, or don't, I'm not saying choose a side and be more divisive, but adopt something and stick to it, and then see how that works for you, and see if that produces results that are conducive to your understanding, because if it doesn't, then you might be wrong. And if you open yourself up to the mystical walk, and Steve is a great author to check out about how you can enter this, you might find that suddenly there's a whole bunch of meaningfulness and purposefulness to your existence.
It's a tricky word.
It is a tricky word. Purpleness.
Purposefulness.
Purpose. That you're not aware of. That might just open up the sky, and the sun might come down on you and go, oh my gosh, I was sitting on the fence, or I was adopting this thing because the books say this, but I'm trying this myself. And, there's instances of experiences you're going to have that no one can take away from you. And if you're working on your rational mind, you're working on your intuitive mind, you're working on the whole thing, right? I mean, if something happens to you, it happened to you. And I mean, okay, actually what I want to say is that choose for yourself. What's your worldview when it comes to what happens after death? Do you think this is it? Do you think you come back? Have a think about these big questions and decide, where you sit, because you might find that when you start rolling with it, you might go, you know what? This isn't correct. But you won't know until you know. Because as they say, if you know, but do not do, then you do not know. And I think this comes down to the importance of personal, direct experience, because we rely far too much on second and third hand information, and we're basing our decisions on this, and we look at how this is affecting in society. Because, like Steve said, I have a bad thought, and the next thing the tanks are rolling down the street. There's a collective aggregation, there's a collective aggregate that, if we're all making the same choices, we are creating something together, this cooperative co-creation, that's going on, so we do have a responsibility for the thoughts we choose to entertain. But I think you're right, like some of the philosophies that are out there are purposely being disseminated to keep us confused, keep us dissonant in our minds, and just go, oh, this is too hard to think about. I'm just going to switch on the sports,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, there were a lot of things that I sort of hoped to say, and I noticed that we've been talking for quite a while, almost 2 hours. So I don't know, maybe we could have a part 2 or something like that. One thing I think
two
that
people. Yep.
Okay. One thing that I would say is that, and I sort of lost my thread before when I was saying about how we locked down with, like something like 500,000 deaths worldwide or something like that. And that's probably an overblown figure, because another thing that these doctors who are being censored out of our consciousness, they're saying that, the way that these statistics are being created is completely fallacious. People are being recorded as having died with COVID instead of from COVID,
Watch
and
how you read that headline.
many people are carrying the gene of this virus. Okay, so but anyway, the point that I didn't get to was that according to the FBI, right, their own statistics, something like 450,000 children go missing from America every year, right?
Yes, I've seen that statistic myself, and I've seen it in the upwards of even 800,000.
Yeah. I mean, that's according to the FBI's official statistic, which they are putting down themselves. This is, the dominant culture, if you like.
Yes.
They are putting down themselves to an international ring of child smuggling and sex slavery, And that's a huge operation.
And operation is the right word.
We don't hear anything about this in the media. We get this Epstein case and that Gazelle or whatever. And how do you say that lady's name? That's
Ghislaine.
No, that other one. That's one of his. Yeah, Maxwell.
Ghislaine Maxwell. Yeah.
Ghislaine, is that it? Okay, I've been, had my own sort of cognitive dissonance over how to say her name, I suppose. Ghislaine Maxwell. I mean, we're hearing about that, but you know what I mean? Why hasn't Epstein's flight list been followed up on? Why is the media silent on this? If you want to talk about a conspiracy, I think this is, quite a large one. And I wanted to mention this because, first of all, I have to say I don't like this idea of people calling these people Satanists, because as far as the formal Church of Satan and Anton LaVey, they are very outspokenly anti-rape and, in fact, anti-coercion. So there is some sort of dark magic or negative magic. I don't even want to use the term black magic. There is that in there. There was a temple on Epstein's Island.
That gets not talked about by the mainstream. Nobody's talking about the damn temple.
Yeah, and the thing is that when you, have mystical experiences and you're bringing the mystic element into your life, you understand that we are actually, in a greater or lesser extent, feeding from each other, right? Okay. Or we're feeding other people and they can be feeding us, like energy-wise, okay? Now, if you've ever performed, which I know you have, Phil, in front of people, or said, made a presentation in front of people, you will know that you get lifted up by the so-called, for want of a better term, aura, right? It lifts you up, okay? When you're playing together in a band, you actually sort of, you're in a kind of a sea of energy together with the people you're playing with. Or if you're in a drama, like a play, right, you actually feel that. You feel that connection that you have with the people in the play because you've rehearsed together and you're in the same mind together, and you feel that. That's one of the reasons why rock stars have such a desperate kind of backstage life, is because they go on stage and, if they're a big rock star, they might be, a lot of people in the audience and they're getting lifted up by all that attention, right? And then they usually fall into drugs or something else afterwards because they want to keep that high that they're getting from the audience, okay? And these are things that when you are living a mystic life, you understand this. This is just part of the universe. You understand these principles, okay? And it's the same principles that are behind this idea that, people will torture and rape children to feed like a vampire, to feed on the energy. And I am not being a conspiracy theorist to say that. One of the most graphic illustrations of how institutionalized this pedophilia and child rape is in Hollywood was when Woody Allen was interviewed about the accusations of his pedophilia and raping children and he didn't even try to deny it, and effectively said, I am a comic genius of unequaled status, and it's part of who I am. That was it. That was his answer. Yeah. It's part of who I am.
And so,
in other words,
yeah.
I get my genius through in my words, right? Now I'll say it in my words. I'm getting my comic genius through sucking the life blood or soul or energy from my victims. Okay, now this is probably the most radical level of my own personal rabbit hole, in what's going on in this world, as far as a group of people, right, who have incredible amounts of power by controlling the media, by having huge multi-trillion corporations that literally buy countries.
Yeah. People don't know how much money we're talking about here. All the countries are in
these
debt.
People are, look, the combined debt in the world, this is all the government debts and things like that, right? It's something like $450 trillion. Well, who is that owed to? It's owed to people, a handful of people who already have that kind of money already that they can actually use anytime they want.
How does it go? Money is for the peasants. It's for poor people. The real players, they just walk in.
Yeah, it's debt, isn't it? It's debt, isn't it?
Yeah.
Really, in the end, it's all about debt. You see? We're all indebted to these people. We all owe. They've done years ago, I remember, that in America and in New Zealand, they were saying how much each individual in that country owes the World Bank and these sort of corporations,
Oh man, we could talk about all those guys too, far out. Hey, look, I'm sorry.
I was going to actually, there were a lot of things that I wanted to talk about. I did sort of spend a long time on what I consider to be a very important thing. Part of the conspiracy is trying to keep pushing out this idea that we're living in a random universe, and therefore, the Oklahoma bombing was just some random event. JFK's assassination was just some random event, And the other side, which I have to mention as well, is that, us so-called conspiracy theorists, we're not the only conspiracy theorists. Many times things are explained by the mainstream with their own conspiracies that make far less rational sense than our conspiracy, But, we've come to 2 hours, so if there's any more questions,
Yeah, if you got a question, everyone, throw it into the chat. But definitely, this would be probably a good time to start just winding things down. So, Steve,
I think we might have to have a part 2 on the actual conspiracies, because we haven't really discussed. I talked about the Balfour Declaration. That's the keyhole. That's the keyhole. That's the start. That's looking into a whole new universe and understanding that Rothschild, who's Lord Rothschild. These people own countries. They own everything. They've got that much money.
Yeah, and I think that here's something. This is to everyone who's listening, watching, and the rest of it out there. This is something that somebody said to me, another podcaster. He shared it on his podcast, and I found this to be very profound. There are people who are not like you and me, who do not think like you and me, who have no problem in using harm and violence to get what they want. They know about the mystical aspect of reality, and they know, and they're part of it too. They're operating with it, and they know some of the loopholes and ways to get around the karmic kickback of certain things. Okay, and that could be a great conversation for another time as well. But what you got to remember, people, is that we say, oh, well, they would never do that. And people who, might know who I'm sort of referencing here, but, they would never do that. No, you would never do that. And that's you projecting yourself onto others and thinking that other people are good natured in that respect. Look, don't get me wrong. I mean, people were saying how Bill Gates, got the polio vaccine out there. Man, you do one good thing, there's plenty of bad people out there doing good things to keep their street cred up. Okay, you kind of got to look beyond the thing here and go deeper. And there's a great documentary out at the moment called Plandemic 2 or Indoctrination that's just dropped. You got to go to BitChute and you got to go to Library and other places to get these documentaries, guys. YouTube, Facebook, and all that. They're just shutting everything down. You got to go wider than the usual social media video platforms. BitChute, Library, lbry.com, minds.com. Go to these other places. Anyway, so if anyone in the audience has got any questions, please bring them forward. Otherwise, we'll start wrapping things up. But Steve, if you're going to sum up, your conversation today as in a practical means that people can, in a sense, what is the psychopathology of a conspiracy theorist was an elaboration of that title, which was the predominant part of the show. But what would you offer as a summary, I guess, just for this first episode, if you like, that people can take away?
What's a summary of the psychopathology of a conspiracy theorist?
Yes.
Okay, first of all, well, we're not just going to buy something because it's being handed to us on a plate by the media and by our education system. That's the first thing, okay? We're going to think for ourselves, and if something doesn't make sense, right, then we won't accept it, I mean, the magic bullet doesn't make sense, and there are many, many other answers that, locking down the whole world and destroying the world's economy, where literally hundreds of millions of people are on starvation because of that, silencing doctors, who and then lying about why you are silencing them, right? These sorts of things, if they don't make you see red, for want of a better expression, if they don't ring alarm bells for you, then wake up, man, because these things should be really ringing alarm bells for you, that censorship like that is going on, that any form of censorship is going on, least of all that expert medical advice is being blocked, so that a computer geek and a whole lot of obviously, financially involved people can literally control your life, the whole world. I mean, I am shocked that anybody accepts the mainstream rhetoric about this COVID thing. I am shocked,
What will it take? What will it take for you to say no? That lost word, that word that says emphatically, no, this is my body, this is my mind, this is my experience. When we start feeling the pressure of the outside world coming and saying, well, you need to change this about yourself and this and that, and you're like, well, hang on, I'm studied, I'm logical, I'm emotionally mature, I'm looking, and and this is it. What will it take? How far does that line have to be pushed by these people before we go, what, fuck it, we can't do it, excuse my French, but we can't do this anymore? No, you don't. No, thank you. This ain't happening. And I mean, this is really important, guys, because we're at we're almost pretty much at the nexus point now. And I've just been monitoring the news headlines, and some of, in Australia and New Zealand, things are potentially getting a bit curly, but I see that the politicians are actually backing off a little bit from the mandatory conversations, which means I think, well, we know that they're monitoring the chatter, and they know that there is some dissent in the masses here, and people are starting to go, hang on, so let's keep pushing. But I can't see any more. But so Brian T. Collins, here you go, Brian. Brian's just put a comment in there: humanity versus psychopaths. And,
I saw that. That's pretty much what it is. But the problem is that there are so many people that are just sort of I don't know, blindly trusting the psychopaths, you know?
It's like, guys, it's okay to question authority. I was watching a video the other day about the importance of anti-authoritarian commentators at any time, because otherwise, imagine if there was no pushback in society. Imagine if everyone just went, well, we'll just do what everyone's doing and do as we're told. Imagine if there was no visible pushback, if people were just accepting everything. I mean, if you were a person who sought out power over others, this is perfect. I mean, if you want to be a psychopath and go and and rule the lives of other people to your own ends, that'd be perfect. If you've got a completely complicit society, that's a wet dream for a psychopath. It's like, oh, fuck, I don't even have to try. People will just do what they told.
That's what they're trying to create, isn't it? By labeling us conspiracy theorists and I mean, I guess like you said right at the start as well. I mean, people are so lazy. You try and explain something to someone, or you give them a link to a website or something like that, and then in the end, they sort of just look at what the name of the website is and say, oh, I don't know, collective evolution, is that the best you'd come up with, or something like that. They don't even bother engaging with it, or they see the thumbnail of this group of doctors in America with that Emmanuel lady in the background who has been, slandered effectively by the media, by the mainstream media, because she's from Africa and she talks to her own people in Hoodoo language, right? And then all of a sudden she becomes the face of all of these doctors. And for the people out there, that's all they know, because they're bombarded with 5 minutes of that lady Emmanuel sort of, maybe having a bit of a laugh at church talking about sex demons or something like that. And they just forget about all the other information that's in there about how the schools are trying to manipulate political power and stuff like that, or they won't reopen. It's got nothing to do with the COVID situation. It's got to do with a particular agenda that they are pushing, all of these sorts of issues,
It's the media painting a narrative. Guys, okay, here's the thing. I'm just going to say it like this. Look, the media is part of the bigger cult. Okay, they're the arm that disseminates the information. And here we go, Brian. Conspiracy theorist is an NLP, a neuro-linguistic programming term to disparage or astroturf real whistleblowers reporting on corruption. Perfect. Thank you, Brian. Yes. Yeah. This is it, guys. You've got to understand that there's this thing called controlled opposition, where you put a message out and then you've got someone talking against it, but they're both controlled by the same puppet master, so to speak. And so they're actually controlling the opposition. It's almost like when you get a protest happen and, these people are protesting and they put these agent de provocateur in there who are there to basically stir up trouble to make the protest turn into a riot. And so and this is constantly going on. If you do not think this is going on, if you do not think people in power are doing this, you are naive. You need to educate yourself. And I will leave it at that, because I'm sorry to put this on your podcast, brother, but I'm just saying that because we have a responsibility to inform ourselves, okay? And that starts with everyone listening and watching this right now. This is our responsibility, because if you're like sitting on the fence going, well, I don't know about this and that, it's probably because you haven't got enough information. The people that we're up against here are highly, highly intelligent. Make no mistake. Don't look at the politicians and go, oh, those bumbling incompetent fools. They're bumbling incompetent fools as part of the advertising package. If you look at guys like Trump and Boris Johnson and all that, they're like identities, they're archetypes almost of like, or a template of just laugh it off, it's just it's like going, man, you don't think there's intelligent people in the background, that are really pulling things going on. There are people who've got so much money invested, they're not going to allow things to go a certain way if they can help it. Okay. And so people will do things for money. People will do things under the threat of punishment. People do things for all sorts of reasons, but it is really our responsibility. So yeah. Don't be naive. Don't get caught in the trap of being uninformed.
There's one really important thing I just thought of now that I need to mention is that this divide and conquer card that they've been playing a long time, so-called Republicans versus Democrats or whatever, where they're dividing the people. They've got that down to a fine art now with this COVID thing, because of course, if you don't want to wear a mask, and if you're saying that all of these statistics are actually fabricated or jumped up, and or that the whole lockdown is just nonsense, what happens is that the people that are buying the mainstream rhetoric actually see us as being dangerous by holding those opinions, you see. And so this is the thing, is that we have to be very careful, because, I mean, personally, I actually think that all of this is leading, because the Balfour Declaration that we mentioned before, and I made the comment that the First World War was fought, well, not just for the creation of Israel. It took to the end of the Second World War, of course, but it started that process. The breaking up of the Ottoman Empire, first of all, is very important to be able to create the position of Palestine, right, for Israel to go and conquer it, if you like, with the help of the UN. It was also for the oil, because it was right at that point when the First World War was fought that they realized the power that would come from oil, what they could do with it. It was actually at that point when they understood what oil was going to be. And so effectively the First World War was financed, both sides were financed by the same people, right, who were in fact addressed in that declaration, who also own almost all of the banks in the world today. Anyway, this is not a conspiracy. This is, historical fact. Okay.
But when you try and tell someone this, though, I don't believe in it. It's like going, you can't tell someone the truth. They have to go and discover it for themselves. And I think this is the thing, is it's like, you can tell someone stuff till they're blue in the face, but until they actually get that thread and go follow it up themselves, man, you can be just talking to a brick wall for a good part of the time, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, that's why I wanted you to bring up the Balfour Declaration, because that's just that one thing alone, 1917, some small, the dominant culture is the psychopath culture. Well, it's run by psychopaths, there's no question about that. During the period between the wars, and especially from 1933, but even before then, there was already a mass exodus. After the Balfour Declaration, you can imagine all of the Zionists, okay, all of the people who wanted to have, the Jewish nationalists, if you want, all of the. I mean, I've just opened up another can of worms. This is going to take.
Keep talking. I'll be back in 2 shakes.
All right. Okay. Oh, you shouldn't have done that. Oh, that's too much. Okay, look, I'm going to, I've opened a can of worms. I better explain a few things here. If we say that Protestants and Catholics will go out to war and fight each other and kill each other, I mean, there's nothing controversial about that. The media has allowed us to learn that. Same with the Muslims, Sunnis and Shiites will fight each other and they will murder each other, create genocides against each other. That, again, the media has filled us with that. We know that. But in fact, in Judaism, it's the same, okay? There are factions in Judaism that hate each other, and this has been going on as long as Judaism has existed. They've even recorded it themselves. Okay, there are some apocryphal books. Maccabees, First and Second Maccabees talks about, these are sort of between 200 and 300 BCE, these books were written, and it talks about where Jews were actually, killing each other, because there were Jewish nationalists and there were Jews that thought that, no, well, we have to wait for the Messiah and we have to wait for God to set up our national home. Okay, and that exact same battle is going on in Judaism right now. So if you decide that you're going to be a Zionist and a Jewish nationalist and you're going to set up the physical nation of Israel, right, then you have claimed yourself on one side of that divide within Judaism. Right? They are generally secular Jews who don't read the Torah, although they're always talking about it, but they don't believe in God. They don't read the Torah. Okay. Whereas the people that do read the Torah, the Jews that do read the Torah and adhere to it, right, they are not pro-Israel, because in the Torah it says that they are not allowed to actually set up their own nation state until the Messiah returns. Now, obviously, in 1917, that declaration was stated that you can have Palestine, which in fact hadn't even been created in 1917 yet, right? It was all the Ottoman Empire, okay? And it was created after the First World War, in the ashes, of the First World War, where all of the Arab people in that area, the Middle Eastern people in that area, fought for Britain and were told that they would be given their land as a payment, and of course they were double crossed, right? And from that period, right up until the start of the Second World War, from 1917 right up to the start of the Second World War, right? Hundreds of thousands of Jews were leaving Europe and setting up, Zionist Jews, right? Not religious Jews, Zionist Jews, right? Were leaving Europe, and mostly from Germany already before Hitler came along, right? They were leaving Europe and they were setting up in Palestine, okay?
Okay, I just want
They
to
were
jump in.
doing what they're doing now, what the Israelis are doing in Palestine now, which is illegally occupying territory and bombing people and blowing up villages and stuff like that. They've been doing that since the 1920s. And Israel was created as an official state after the Second World War in 1948. Right? And of course, this is another thing I wanted to mention too, that, this idea of fulfilling prophecy, fulfilling revelations, Israel fulfills the revelation, which is a Christian prophecy, don't forget. Okay, it's not a Jewish prophecy, it's a Christian prophecy. But the thing is, in Revelation, when the Jews return to their homeland, there's no question about it, it's accepted by everyone, which is exactly the opposite of what's going on right now in Israel. It has been the whole way through. The UN jumping up and down and going, oh, you're doing all this illegally, but what are they doing about it? Nothing, And as it happens, and this is the reason that I started on this, and I've only just opened there's a lot more to this. There's a lot more to this. Go and listen to David Irving and for a while, and you'll be ready for the next stage of this whole conspiracy. Okay, these people own all the media, right? Okay, they have done for a long time. Okay, now where was I?
I was going to say, what I don't like. It's like I'm okay to sit around for a bit longer, brother. But I know that it's getting pretty late in the piece for you. So if you
I'm
wanted
okay at the moment because I've started. I've unraveled something here.
Okay. Well, you're talking about the Balfour Declaration being a pretty obvious sort of example of, some basically the boys' club hooking each other up, or well, it's not. That's actually not correct. But like it's a pretty obvious like situation that makes you call into question, certain things.
Yeah. I mean, it's sort of like, people say, well, how is it that you think that that Jewish people funded the Second World War, which they did, right, for the formation of, that's what I was going to say, that's right. Okay, for the formation of Israel. It's because there are factions. One faction of Judaism will actually go and create a genocide against another faction. Okay, and they're actually doing it now, right? The Zionists, the pro-Israeli Jews who think that it's fine for them to have their own nation state, right, are being they are being criticized by the religious Jews who say, no, we have to wait for the Messiah before we can set up a nation state. And these religious Jews who are protesting against Israel, right, they're being sent to concentration camp by the secular Jews right now. Okay, so if you want to, one of Hitler's main advisors was a man called Rosenberg, who was a Jew. Both wars, both sides were funded by Jewish banks, right? The Rothschilds. And Lord Rothschild was the guy who the Balfour Declaration was addressed to. Now, this is not conspiracy theory. Well, I mean, it is a conspiracy theory technically, but this is not some crazy, this is history. This is history. And there's been many lies covering over much of the history. And right now, especially thanks to David Irving, like he's filled in a lot of gaps for me, that guy, about what happened, because Hitler wasn't creating all of that. The concentration camps were never called that, and they were never called death camps. They were only ever called work camps, right? And I mean, why would Hitler take Jews from all over Europe, transport them in the middle of a war, which is hugely resource dependent? When, in a war, you don't waste your resources, just to murder them in concentration camps. They were being murdered on the streets in the synagogues by people who had been programmed to be hateful and murderous. That's what happened. And there were two in particular Nazis, Goering and Rosenberg. This guy Rosenberg, who you never hear of. Why don't you ever hear of this Nazi called Rosenberg, who was a Jewish Nazi, a Zionist Nazi? Why don't you ever hear about that? He was Hitler's #1 advisor, and that he was actually right there on the front line doing most of the murdering of the Jews, the Holocaust. Right? Hitler was always saying, send them east, send them east. It was a numbers game. They were playing a numbers game. They were really very seriously oppressing and murdering Jews. And the idea was, right, that all the Jews that had no problems setting up a nation state in Palestine, they were leaving in their hundreds of thousands. And if they didn't leave, then they were religious Jews. And they were the enemy to the Zionists. Now, that's a really radical statement. Okay? And in fact, David Irving hasn't come that far. I'm sure he believes that, but he's never actually come out and said that.
Here we go. It's a comment from Brian. IBM got its start with the invention of cataloging the property of the camp workers. Interesting.
Yeah. Well, actually, the Auschwitz, right, the big gas chamber of Auschwitz was built after. This is more history for you, okay? It was built after the war by the Russians, and in fact, the original gas chamber that was used at Auschwitz, okay, was as big as a single bedroom, an average single bedroom, like 3 meters by 4 meters or something like that, okay? And there were Jews that were gassed there, but only the ones that couldn't work enough to produce enough, right? The millions of Jews, and there wasn't 6 million, and to refine that number is you know what I mean? It's, there were well over 1 million Jews that were murdered, but the vast majority of those Jews were murdered on the streets and in the synagogues by normal people, and not just the Germans either. And this is one of the reasons why Poland and the Netherlands, right, and other countries, but I mean, I haven't looked at the other countries, but I have looked at Poland and the Netherlands, and they were just as guilty. They were just as guilty of oppressing and murdering Jews as what the Germans were, And that's one of the reasons why all these countries just said, yeah, that's who it was. It's like, after the war, what happened, Germany's always going on about how it faced its shadow. It couldn't have done more the opposite of that. It went on a witch hunt. Who can we blame for this? The Germans didn't do that. No, those people over there, the Nazis, something outside Germany. And then this myth built up that the Germans were like some sort of, I don't know, being held captive in their own country, so you know what I mean, under some sort of occupation by some foreign force, the Nazis. It's completely false, So I've opened up a whole thing, but the point I'm coming to right now, right, is that the Jews have the Zionists, I'm not going to say Jews, that's wrong, okay, because then you do get labeled anti-Semitic, okay, but the Zionists have never been happy with the boundaries that they were given originally by the UN of Palestine. They've always had their own map, right? Since before 1917, the Zionists have had their own map of what they want for their nation state, which includes what is now all of Jordan, all of Palestine, obviously, right? All of Lebanon, right? And a huge swathe of Iraq and Iran, right? And they won't stop until they get that, right? Now, they've created, funded, and perpetuated 2 world wars to get what they've got so far, and they're nowhere near finished. So it's only a matter of time before, right? And especially now, because what's happened is the Jews have been occupying illegal territory all over the place, or sorry, the Zionists. I have to be careful. The Israelis, if you like, okay, have been occupying illegal territory all around Israel for decades. And they found oil on the Golan Heights, right, which is not Israel, it's Syria. Okay, this is what all the fighting's going on for right now, okay. And they've sold the rights to drill that oil already. Okay, they've already sold the rights to drill for this oil on the Golan Heights. And of course, there are, implicated in this, people who were in top layers of the American military, shareholders in these oil companies and stuff like that. So this is the conspiracy, right? So the Third World War is just, it cannot not happen, right? The people who are controlling everything, right, which is the Zionists, okay, and I know this sounds anti-Semitic. The Zionists are the most anti-Semitic people that have ever existed when you look at it.
What does anti-Semitic mean?
Yeah, okay, I was just about to explain that. Semitism, right, are people that speak Hebrew, Aramaic, and Arabic. Those are the 3 Semitic languages. So in other words, Arabs are Semitic people, right? Now, the Zionists have, as we all know, right, been murdering millions of Arabs since at least 1917, when the Balfour Declaration was first signed and given to Rothschild. This whole idea of going and occupying Palestine, right? I mean, this is well before Israel in 1948 was created. There was already massive amounts. They were bulldozing villages and stuff, throwing people out in the early 1930s. Hundreds of thousands were being murdered. Okay. And they've got their idea of how much land they want and what they've got at the moment. This is why they keep pushing and pushing and pushing. And what are the UN going? Oh no, you got to stop that. Oh no, you can't keep doing that. Nothing's happening about it. And they keep doing it. Look at get the Gaza Strip at the moment. I mean, that's just an indictment that's allowed to continue. You talk about a conspiracy theory. The very fact that the murdering and the just the terrorism that's going on in the Gaza Strip right now is allowed to continue, and try and tell me that there's not a pack of despots ruling this world whose goal, right, is to drive all the Arabs out of that whole area. And set up the nations, the God-given nation state of Israel for the Zionists. And you try and tell me that I'm a conspiracy theorist because what's happening right before my eyes been happening. I was born in 1963. This has been going on since before I was born.
Yeah, and we don't even need to go that level. I mean, when you mentioned before about the hang on, I'm a bit loud. When you mentioned before about the hundreds of thousands, literally hundreds of thousands of children that go missing in the United States alone, nearing 500,000 and upwards. I mean, My God, why is that not a freaking pandemic type situation when we're going, right, hang
Yeah,
on, we need to find
exactly.
out we need to find out what's happening to all these kids, because these are only the ones we know about. And this is happening, like people think, oh, it's probably, I don't know, like I don't know what the average person would come up with as in a reason, because I find that some people will instantly jump to apologize and say, well, it won't be this and that, it'll be that and this or something. But, that, like I said, like you said, we're talking
Yeah,
about,
ethnic cleansing.
we're talking
There's
about,
rights and violence.
conservatively, 500,000 children. This is just in one part of the world. I heard, I was listening to David Whitehead and Michael Tessarian talk the other day about this, and he was mentioning more conservatively 2 to 5 million children a year across the planet go missing. I mean, and it's very hard to get a number
That's
on
per year. That's per year.
Yeah. Where do these kids
I mean,
go?
it's a disgrace on humanity that this is not, I mean, if I had a newspaper or a television station, I'd have a team of investigative journalists working on that full time with no boundary on their funding,
My God, like what? Like how do the sports and the stock market take precedence over this real situation, right?
Yeah. I mean, this is a huge thing. And, we're called conspiracy theorists because we're putting a huge big question mark as to why is this not a huge thing? Why are we being bombarded with nonsense about wearing masks and social distancing, which is literally murdering far more people than what might be getting saved from some bogus virus, And we hear nothing. Well, next to nothing, apart from occasionally we hear something, and it's just so, and nobody's doing anything about it.
I was just
And we're conspiracy theorists because we put a question mark over why this is happening.
there's a story on the Stuff website today about how suicides are apparently down. Suicide deaths the lowest in 3 years. I know. Hang on. What? I'll just throw this up on the screen here so that everyone can see it. Where are we? That one. Suicide rates shows slight drop after record high. Mental health experts see a small silver lining. Oh, hang on. What's going on here? I don't want to hear her voice. Figures released by the chief coroner showed 654 people died from suicide in the year to June 2020, a drop of 31 from the 2000. Okay. So this is not about what's happening at the moment. And you got to remember, look, guys, why would they be releasing this information right now? It's because they're trying to counter the conversation about how the lockdown and the mask and everything else, all the other accoutrements that come along with the lockdown, how they're affecting the mental landscape of society here. And this information might say, oh well, deaths are down, but when you go into it, it's like, well, hang on, is it current or is it just saying between two dates? I haven't read this article yet, so maybe what I'll do is that I'll go and have a read.
What is that? Because that looks full of speculation causes harm. That looks really full of propaganda. Actually, what is that website?
I'm just going to put it
Stuff.
up.
Stuff. Yeah, okay.
I'll put it in the chat so people can see the connection, so they can go and have a look at the article themselves and inform themselves. But I was watching a lady got on there before and talked about it was an opinion piece in the same newspaper. She was talking about how New Zealanders are hardwired to be compliant and obedient, and about what is the relationship between the average person on the street and that terminology hardwired. And they were using lots of experiments like the Milgram experiment. But for those that are familiar, basically people got tested to see if they would perform harm to others. It's a long story, but anyway, but it's like, well, you can twist the results of experiments and the intention of experiments and things like that in studies to come out how you want. It's not that hard to do that. It's a bit of an art form. I mean, accountants do stuff with statistics all the time, I guess. But like this idea that, information can be presented in a way to sort of like before the question appears in your head, the answer has already popped up on the news website. Oh, well, okay. Well, that's that question answered. It's like going, well, these people they've got their crystal balls out, these marketers and these controllers, and they're looking for the questions that are going to be popping up in the public's head, and they want to put them to rest before people can voice their thing. Because, I've said this out and think, why are the numbers inflated for the COVID numbers? Nobody disagrees that they're being inflated. Well, it's a bit of an offset because on the other side, some people are going to fall through the systems and stuff. And I'm like going, that's not a valid reason why they're inflating numbers. It's like, I just get this real sense of this apologist kind of view of things, and it's saddening a little bit because it's like, and yeah, like I said, I'm not going to pick this one apart because I haven't read it. I only just saw it this morning, but I'm going to have a look at it a bit later because this is the kind of information, like you said, it's propaganda. I mean, like they don't want the idea that the lockdown, because it's bad for electioneering. If you've made a decision and you're about to go to the polls and, your decision is causing all these sort of, deaths that can be correlated to the lockdown that you've mandated. So Boo Boo Monkeys just said maybe it's not all random, and it's
it's quite funny though because just recently I heard that the Australian media has allowed to escape through, to get through their tentacles. The fact that the suicide rate has actually significantly increased in Australia, 4,000 apparently.
Damn.
Yeah. So, and I mean, the New York Times, right? The New York Times is one of the few media outlets that isn't owned by the conspirators. Okay.
I still don't trust them, but...
right? And they ran an article recently that hundreds of millions of people, right, are now starving to death because of the lockdowns, and mostly in the third world, right? And the worldwide casualty rate at the moment of this COVID is 500,000, and that is absolutely, without question, higher than the real figure.
Yeah,
so I mean, what's the comparison? You know what I mean?
Yeah, you got to take a bit from here and a bit from there and a bit from there and a bit to there, and you got to come up with your own conclusions, guys, because otherwise your conclusions are going to be handed to you on a plate, and it's like, which one's the most comfortable for me? And
that's what I was going to say before, is that people do believe what they want to believe. When I saw that headline, "Suicides Down," right? I knew that was designed for people to, to just calm people, just give you a little, here, have this, make this, this will make you feel a bit better.
Some reassurance. We know what we're doing, guys. We've got this.
Will lap that up, There'll be a lot of people. I know a lot of Kiwis still, obviously, and I know a lot of Kiwis that will be lapping that up. They'll be going, "Oh, see, there you go. It's all okay. We can carry on wearing our masks. People aren't really that stressed out about it." Despite that, these same people will actually have expressed their own concern, and then they'll do that. Stuff will publish that. Which I put a question mark over all of this.
Yeah, I mean, anything that leaves the lips of these people should be brought into question. I mean, that's why balancing your information stream with that of the dominators, the dominant society, with that of the alternative journalists. And I'm not saying that the alternative journalists are necessarily saints or get it right all the time either. But what you're doing is that you are attempting to do the right thing by casting a wide net. And endeavoring to you're aiming for, we're all striving for the highest good here and the outcomes, right? We want the highest good for humanity. That's my goal anyway, and that's why I value truth and wisdom so highly, because I and I try to live according to this as well, to do my best. And I think doing our best, let's be our own accountability partners, in the sense of has this conclusion that I have come to, have I really explored that enough to be satisfied with it? Because that's like testing your own mettle with this, because don't bring a knife to a gunfight, guys, because, you're going to find that people out in the public will generally be parroting a lot of the same rhetoric and things. They'll be standing around the water cooler talking about the same things and just reinforcing that. Someone will bring up a question, and then I've noticed this. You know, someone will bring up a genuine question about something, and then someone will have a response that the media has supplied. And all you're doing is you're basically reading off a script that you've, you know, consciously, unconsciously read when you're looking at the newspaper or the website. And people are like going, oh, yeah, but that was answered over here, so we don't need to worry about that anymore. And it's like, yeah, but what about this? No, mate. It's all been answered. It's settled. It's settled. Is it?
Yeah.
Anyway, I one of my little rants and raves. Brother?
It's okay. It's okay. I mean, as you were talking about that, you know, standing around the water fountain, I was just sort of coming back to this idea that, you know, how formulaic people are, you know, and they are, you know. I think, you know, so again, you know, where's this random universe? But I think we should wrap it up. Last call for questions to the audience, I think. Yeah. And we can wrap it up, I think.
Cool. So
we're going 3 hours, man. This is a long time. It's just gone like that.
And it's like we're almost just getting warmed up.
Yeah, I know. I was actually just about to say there were a couple of minor conspiracy theories, you know, that tie into the bigger picture that I was anticipating to have talked about. And I didn't actually anticipate to talk about the long evolution of the creation of Israel, which I did end up discussing.
It's out there now.
The reason is because both world wars were absolutely organized for the creation of Israel. There's no question about that. And also to get hold of the oil in the Middle East. That was the First World War. Yeah. Break up the Ottoman Empire, get the oil, get the rights to the oil. Right? And then, you know, I mean, why do you think Balfour wrote that declaration? I mean, that doesn't stand. That's not the beginning of the whole thing. That's not the beginning of, you know, the English government didn't think, oh, look, looks like we might win this. I mean, in 1917, it didn't look like they were going to win. If they hadn't have got the Americans, you know, that's another part of it, is bringing the Americans in to the First World War and the Second World War, you know, to carry it on. The Germans in 1917, they offered a very viable treaty, in fact, that was refused, you know.
A crisis never goes...
Because they thought, no, we'll get America and then we'll get them, you know. We'll get these guys, you know.
A crisis never goes... Sorry, I just want to jump in and just say a crisis never goes to waste.
No, it never goes to waste.
You know, so these large events, and I'm going to dare to say these large manufactured events create a huge numbers of opportunities. I mean, just look at how all the laws are just being pushed through at the moment. And these laws, we're only going to be putting them on for a short, you know, just for the temporary requirement of the current situation. We all know. We've heard guys like Assange and Snowden and other commentators. I mean, that's just two, much more. They might even be the best two to bring up. But, you know, I've listened to people say this repeatedly. People, they put these laws through. Then these laws have this nasty habit of sticking around after the fact. And they count on this because they count on the docility, the compliance, the acquiescence of the public. And so, in a sense, because we do not speak, we are our own worst enemies. And like I said, you know, how far does that line have to be pushed before you say, we ain't having it? No, you don't. I'm not going with this. I'm sorry. Nah, man. You know, but anyway, Steve, hey, I just want to say thank you so much for coming on today.
You're most welcome. Thank you very much. This has been a really cool talk. Actually, I've had a really interesting discussion with you, and I'm really glad that we've had some comments that we can, you know, the feedback backwards and forwards with the people watching.
Shout out to everyone in the chat. You guys have been really great. We haven't had
it's been really cool. It's been really cool. I'm glad that you know, that I haven't been too radical in some of the things that I was going to say. I didn't anticipate saying all that about Israel, but I mean, that's the conspiracy. That's what's going on. These people own the media, right? These people own the oil companies. They own most of the weapons manufacturers. They own the pharma firms. You know what I mean? Monsanto now, of course, Bill Gates is in with all of this now. You know, they're absolutely control. They've got WHO, the World Health Organization, and the UN in their back pocket, and this is not a conspiracy. This is history. You know, this is history. I mean, the UN was basically set up as a big umbrella operation for the creation of Israel. What was the first thing, the most important thing that it's done? And the whole time it's existed, effectively, is create Israel, the UN.
I remember Gaddafi got up and said, or I thought it was either Gaddafi or I think it was Gaddafi got up and said, since the UN has been created, we've had more wars.
Yeah, exactly.
It hasn't done anything except create more wars, But anyway, brother, I just want to say a big, massive thank you so much. A massive love to you and family on the other side of the planet there. Thank you for your time and your knowledge and your wealth of wisdom to share with everyone that's out there on such a delicate topic at such a controversial time. And it was great to just... this was a bit cathartic for me as well, just to share some of my own views. And so I think we've kind of...
Yeah, it's great to listen to you, man. You did a great job. Thank you very, very much. And thank you very much to all the people that were commenting and watching. Even if you haven't commented, thank you for watching.
And make sure you check out Steve's website, guys, because there's so much good stuff on there. He's written a stack of books. He publishes them himself. spiritualinstinctpress.com. Check it out. I've got it up on the website there. And so, Steve, if I get you to stick around just for 2 seconds, just after I finish the broadcast.
Sure, absolutely, yeah.
Okay, so yeah, hey, thank you so much, everyone. And so what I want you to do with me is just take another few deep breaths, pull your fingers up to under your nose there. Don't put them too far up. You might scratch your brain. Let's just take a few deep breaths together. It's good to be free. It's good to breathe. It's good to be alive. I want you all to know that I'm so grateful for you all. Thank you so much for all your input and support. And if you would like to support this podcast, there's an option here that I'm displaying on the screen, and I'll put something in the show notes below as well for those who would like to either send me an encouraging email, which I very much value, or those who would like to make a monetary donation of sorts. That is also very great. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a beautiful, wonderful, amazing day. And don't forget, I've got another guest coming on tomorrow, which I will advertise shortly on my Facebook, and also it'll be on my YouTube channel. So thank you so much. You guys have a great weekend, and we'll hopefully see some of you tomorrow. Thank you so much.